Chapter 635. Chu Mu's willpower, which was born from his powerful soul, was naturally very powerful, far surpassing that of ordinary swordsmen. Even so, he could only release his willpower to a range of 100 meters in the ancient world. One could imagine that other swordsmen could only release their willpower to a range of 10, 20, or 30 meters. I wonder if I can increase the range of my willpower after cultivating tempering mind skill? With a trace of anticipation, Chu Mu studied it once and sorted out all the things he needed to pay attention to during cultivation. Then, he began to enter a cultivation state. The cultivation of tempering mind skill was different from the cultivation of the heavenly wilderness sword technique because willpower and sword origin were different. They were two different types of power. Compared to the cultivation of sword origin, the cultivation of willpower was more mysterious. This was also why there were so many cultivation techniques that cultivated sword origin but very few that cultivated willpower. It was too illusory, difficult to understand, and difficult to grasp. Tempering mind skill was to materialize illusory willpower and refine it like a kind of energy. Chu Mu's willpower was very powerful, so it was easy for him to enter the state of cultivation. However, due to the strength of his willpower, it took some time to complete the refinement. For an entire day and night, Chu Mu was in the midst of cultivation. After a day and night, he finished cultivating, and all of his willpower had been refined. Tempering mind skill was a basic cultivation technique after all, so it could only be refined once. However, after the refinement, Chu Mu immediately felt the difference. He released his willpower to cover a range of 100 meters again. This was the limit that Chu Mu could reach. After cultivating tempering mind skill, the range of his willpower did not increase, but Chu Mu was not disappointed. This was because he realized that before cultivating tempering mind skill, he felt a little strenuous when he could release his willpower to a range of 100 meters. Now, he could release his willpower to a range of 100 meters without feeling strenuous. His willpower had become more resilient. The second change was the most important one. Everything within a 100-meter radius that was covered by his mental power had become clearer. The clarity had at least doubled. In other words, after cultivating tempering mind skill, Chu Mu's willpower had doubled, although its quantity did not increase. For spiritual consciousness, quantity was very important, and so was strength. Just like sword origin, the quantity referred to the amount of sword origin, while the strength referred to the purity of sword origin. Both were indispensable. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. "Brother Chu, are you done with your cultivation?" Jiang Chuan's voice came from outside. "I just finished cultivating." Chu Mu stood up and opened the door. "How is it?" Jiang Chuan's eyes lit up as he asked. "I did." Chu Mu smiled. "It's good that you've gained something." Jiang Chuan didn't ask what he had gained. After all, strength was a private matter. His relationship with Chu Mu wasn't so good that he could casually reveal secrets. "By the way, there's a teacher who's going to talk about swordsmanship today. Are you interested in joining us?" "All right." Chu Mu didn't even think and immediately agreed. The Sky Edge Sword Palace was not considered a sect. It was more like a school. Therefore, within the Sky Edge Sword Palace, there was an instructor position. To become an instructor of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, one's strength was extraordinary. They were also experienced and knowledgeable. Their cultivation was profound, far surpassing the disciples. A swordsmanship talk meant a lesson. An instructor's sword talk was usually held once a month. However, due to the sheer number of official disciples in the Sky Edge Sword Palace, a total of 2 million, it was impossible for all of them to be arranged together to listen to an instructor's sword talk. The Sky Edge Sword Palace naturally had its own way of dealing with it. Within the Sky Edge Sword Palace, there were tens of thousands of ordinary teachers and tens of thousands of swordsmanship rooms. Every time a swordsmanship talk was held, 10,000 swordsmanship rooms would be opened at the same time. Each room could easily accommodate 200 to 300 people. It was more than enough for one teacher to handle 200 to 300 disciples. The swordsmanship talk was only held once a month. It was considered an opportunity, so how could Chu Mu miss it? Furthermore, he still had many questions in his heart that needed answers. Together with Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian, the three of them left the Sword Tower district and headed for the swordsmanship area. From the moment they became official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, they had already been arranged. Who would go to which swordsmanship room, etc. This was to prevent some from having too many swordsmanship rooms and others from having too few swordsmanship rooms. Chu Mu and the other two headed for the swordsmanship room that had already been arranged. When they arrived, there were already more than 100 swordsmen in the room. The teacher had already arrived and was sitting at the teacher's seat at the front, resting with his eyes closed. This teacher was a middle-aged man in his 40s. According to Chu Mu's judgment, this teacher's true age was probably in his 40s. The aura he emitted was very weak, but Chu Mu could still sense it. He should be a sword of Gojosian. A 40-year-old sword of Gojosian was extremely rare in the ancient sword continent, but it was nothing in the immemorial world. The swordsmanship room looked very simple. The floor and walls were white, and there were also trapezoid-shaped seats. There was even a 100-meter-wide arena in the corner. Although the decorations looked simple, there was a certain charm to it. In the empty space between the teacher and the disciples, there was an incense burner. A stick of incense was burning in the burner, and green smoke rose in spirals. A faintly discernible fragrance that calmed one's heart permeated the air and spread throughout the entire swordsmanship room. Chu Mu and the other two casually found a seat and sat down. After a while, there were more than 200 people sitting in the swordsmanship room. Most of them were swordsmen from the immemorial world, while a small portion were swordsmen from the 9 continents. It was clear that the swordsmen from the immemorial world and the swordsmen from the 9 continents were very distinct. In this situation, the teacher did not say anything. The moment he opened his mouth, he gave a simple self-introduction. His main purpose was to let the swordsmen from the 9 continents know him. The teacher's name was Ji Tianxiang, and he was a 4-star sword of Gojosian. 4-star sword of Gojosian. Chu Mu noted this name down. Perhaps this was one of the classifications among sword of Gojosian. However, he did not know how powerful a 4-star sword of Gojosian was. A swordsman needs to be strong both externally and internally. The 4-star sword of Gojosian, Ji Tianxiang, spoke at a steady pace. His tone was rather calm. Externally, it is the swordsman's utilization of the geographical advantage. Internally, it is the swordsman's own strength, including physical strength, sword origin, sword intent, and so on. Whether a swordsman is strong or not is directly related to his strength, but it is not everything. This is because to possess strength, one must also learn how to use it. To use strength well, one must know how to control one's own strength. Today, I will be explaining the control of strength. The control of strength is limitless. It is a lifelong cultivation for any swordsman who wants to become strong. Ji Tianxiang had already prepared the contents of today's lecture. The moment he opened his mouth, he began to explain. The control of strength is formless. However, through the research of our ancestors, the control of strength has been divided into different levels. In this world, some of the swordsmen from the immemorial world had indifferent expressions, while others had a trace of disapproval. Only the swordsmen from the 9 continents listened attentively. This was because they had never heard of this before. Today, I will tell you the first level of the control of strength. This level is called Advanced Level, Ji Tianxiang said slowly. Advanced Level. Chu Mu and the others repeated in their hearts. The so-called advanced level refers to being able to control one's own strength freely. Whether it is physical strength, sword origin, sword intent, profound, or so on, the control of one's own strength has reached the level of being able to control it as one pleases. Ji Tianxiang said, for example, when you attack your opponent with your sword, only at the last moment when your sword is about to hit your opponent will you mobilize your own strength and pour it into your sword to form an effective attack. This is advanced level. If you are able to pour your strength into any part of your sword at will and unleash an even stronger power, this is advanced level, Ji Tianxiang said. Chu Mu and the other swordsmen from the 9 continents memorized this. Obviously, the swordsmen from the immemorial world already had some understanding of this. Instructor Ji Tianxiang's lecture this time was mainly aimed at the swordsmen from the 9 continents. It could be seen that not all swordsmen from the immemorial world discriminated against the swordsmen from the 9 continents. Next, I will explain how to cultivate the control of strength and reach advanced level. Ji Tianxiang explained the first level of the control of strength, advanced level, so that everyone had a better understanding of it. Everyone immediately focused and listened attentively. There is no shortcut to the control of strength. However, some people are more talented and will be able to control their strength faster than ordinary people and reach advanced level. Ji Tianxiang said, controlling one's own strength, to put it clearly, is control. Increasing one's control over the various strengths in one's body, controlling the speed of gathering strength, controlling the efficiency of gathering strength, controlling the degree of gathering strength, and so on are all within the scope of control of strength. How to cultivate control of strength? Very directly, strengthen the strength of one's mind. The stronger and more tenacious one's mind, the easier it is to control one's body, and the easier it will be to reach advanced level. Following Ji Tianxiang's explanation, the swordsman gradually revealed expressions of enlightenment. Ji Tianxiang's explanation was very direct and easy to understand. With the swordsman's intelligence, they could completely understand and remember it. However, being able to understand was one thing, and being able to do it was another matter. Take the primordial swordsman as an example. Many of these primordial swordsmen had already learned how to cultivate power control, but until now, only a small number of them had been able to cultivate power control to the first level, which was the entry-level realm. As the saying goes, looking at a mountain runs a horse to death. When you see a mountain, you think it's right in front of you, as if you can reach it by taking a few steps forward. However, you realize that no matter how you move forward, even when the horse is running to death, you still can't reach the mountain. And that mountain still gives you the illusion that it's right in front of you, that you can reach it by taking a few steps forward. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 636. The 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. Ji Tianxiang's explanation of power control was extremely detailed. The rest would be up to the swordsmen to cultivate themselves. Instructor, I've been cultivating power control for the past few years. Although I haven't reached the advanced level, I've gained some insights recently. Can I find someone to spar with so that you can give me some pointers? An ancient swordsman suddenly stood up and bowed to Ji Tianxiang. All right. Ji Tianxiang nodded. He also wanted to see if anyone could catch his eye. Who's willing to spar with me on the battle arena? Ping Quan turned his head and swept his gaze across the crowd with a smile. His gaze paused slightly on Chu Mu and the other swordsmen with a hint of provocation. None of the ancient swordsmen agreed because they knew that rather than showing Ji Tianxiang what they had learned over the past few years, it was more like showing off their strength to the swordsmen of the 9 continents. Ji Tianxiang seemed to have understood something as well. A faint smile flashed across his face. He didn't say anything. Instead, he waited patiently. Speaking once a month could be as short as 4 hours or as long as 12 hours. Less than 2 hours had passed, so there was no need for him to be anxious. Ji Tianxiang did not look down on the swordsmen of the 9 continents at all, nor did he attach importance to them. He only treated them calmly. If he had to make a choice between the swordsman of the immemorial world and the swordsman of the 9 continents, he would naturally choose the swordsman of the immemorial world because he himself was a swordsman of the immemorial world. However, if the swordsman of the 9 continents could display outstanding talent and surprise him, Ji Tianxiang would change his mind. He had never been to the 9 continents before. He only knew from hearsay and some of his own insights that the 9 continents were far inferior to the immemorial world in terms of cultivation, environment, and resources. In theory, the swordsman of the immemorial world should be more outstanding than the swordsman of the 9 continents. Most of the swordsmen who had entered the immemorial world this time were in their 30s, while the swordsmen of the immemorial world were only in their 20s at the same level of strength. There was a difference of nearly 10 years. Some of the more talented primordial swordsmen would become Sword of Gojoseon in their 30s. However, Ji Tianxiang still wanted to see if there were any outstanding swordsmen from the 9 continents who could compare to the swordsmen from the ancient world. Peng Quan leapt up and landed on the stage like an eagle. She drew her sword and pointed it at the swordsmen from the 9 continents. She said, "We swordsmen from the Archean world know what it means to control power and what it means to reach the threshold before you do. If you want to walk down this path as soon as possible, the best method is to personally experience it. Although I haven't reached entry realm yet, I'm not far from it." In other words, Peng Quan was saying that he had walked faster and further on the path of controlling power than the swordsmen of the 9 continents. "Then I'll have a taste of your skills." A swordsman from the 9 continents couldn't help but ask. He leaped into the air and landed on the stage. He unsheathed his sword and thrust it forward. After listening to Ji Tianxiang's lecture on controlling power, he couldn't help but give it a try this time. He found it very difficult. As he thrust his sword forward, his own power subconsciously poured into the sword, bringing with it the sound of wind and thunder. The sword's momentum was shocking as it swept forward. Peng Quan wasn't surprised at all. Instead, she smiled disdainfully. The swordsman from the Archean world also smiled disdainfully. This kind of attack seemed shocking, but it didn't even touch the surface of controlling power. At least 70% of one's power was wasted, and they couldn't even unleash their full power. Ji Tianxiang was indifferent. He didn't believe that a swordsman could immediately reach the threshold of controlling power with just a single lecture. "I'll let you properly experience the power of controlling power," Peng Quan growled. She didn't dodge at all. Instead, she swung her sword to meet the opponent's sword. Compared to the 2 swords, Peng Quan's sword was weaker, but it seemed to be free of many restraints. It was faster and arrived first. When the sword was about 3 inches away from Peng Quan used her own strength. Instantly, it surged into the sword and exploded, causing the speed of the sword to suddenly increase by 30%. It was faster and more powerful, and the momentum that erupted was even more violent and ferocious. The opponent's expression drastically changed. Whether it was the speed or the explosive power of this sword, that terrifying aura had locked onto him. The sword's pressure made him feel as if he had nowhere to dodge. After all, it was a competition and not a life-and-death battle. Peng Quan's wrist slightly twisted, and the sword turned from a slash to a slap, slapping the opponent's chest. The tyrannical power shattered the opponent's protective sword aura. The opponent's body flew back uncontrollably. He spat out blood as he landed on the ground. He staggered back a few steps. His face was pale and filled with disbelief. Although the 2 of them had the same cultivation base, and there wasn't much of a difference in the purity of sword yuan and the comprehension of sword intent, it was still hard to accept that he was defeated so easily. Controlling power. Everything was because of controlling power. Chumu was a bit surprised. Peng Quan's control of power was even more profound than Situ Xiu's and Yang Lai's. It could be said that she was very, very close to entering realm. However, being very close didn't mean that she could break through quickly. Sometimes it could be done in a short 1 or 2 months. Sometimes it might not even take 1 or 2 years. Within the Sky-Edge Sword Palace, there were many swordsmen at Peng Quan's level. Who else wants to give me some pointers? After defeating her opponent in one strike, Peng Quan waved her sword and shouted in high spirits. I'll do it, Jiang Chuan coldly replied. His legs kicked off and he jumped high into the air, landing on the stage. Draw your sword. Peng Quan's gaze was somewhat condescending as she stared at Jiang Chuan. Jiang Chuan didn't get angry. His temperament was calm as he slowly drew his sword. After performing a sword salute, he held his sword horizontally in front of him, waiting with rapt attention. This was because in his heart, Jiang Chuan didn't think that he could defeat her. His true goal was to personally experience the might of controlling power. A more direct experience would be more helpful to his cultivation. Looking at Jiang Chuan's posture, Peng Quan knew that her opponent wouldn't be so rash as to attack first. Instead, he adopted a conservative defensive posture. This defensive posture was able to block attacks from all angles to the greatest extent. However, I'll let you know that your defense is useless. Peng Quan's lips curled into a cold smile as she stabbed out with her sword. This sword was light as a feather, as if it didn't contain any power. The trajectory of the stab was also very ordinary. However, Jiang Chuan didn't dare to blink. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and tried his best to see it more clearly. Hit! Peng Quan exhaled and shouted. She was full of power. When her sword was 3 inches away from Jiang Chuan, she poured her power into the sword, causing it to explode. A rumbling sound rang out, as if the mountains were collapsing and the earth was splitting apart. Jiang Chuan hurriedly used his sword to block. His left hand directly pressed against the sword to strengthen his defense. In a split second, Jiang Chuan felt a terrifying force collide with his sword. The power he had poured into his sword showed signs of dissipating. The tyrannical force caused his hand to go numb. His entire body was pushed back uncontrollably until he reached the edge of the arena. He almost fell out of the arena. So powerful! Jiang Chuan's face paled. His eyes were filled with shock. Only after personally experiencing the so-called control of power did he understand its might. When using the same level of power, there was at least a 30% difference in power between the two. Then, if he reached the advanced realm, would he be even more powerful? Thank you for your guidance. Jiang Chuan sheathed his sword and bowed to Peng Quan. Even though he knew that Peng Quan was deliberately making a fool of him, he still learned something. Jiang Chuan's actions made Ji Tianxiang smile. He nodded imperceptibly, which also surprised the immemorial swordsman. Is there not a single one of you who can fight me? Peng Quan's attitude didn't change because of Jiang Chuan's humility. It was as if he was deliberately angering the swordsmen of the 9 continents. His tone was even sharper and more aggressive. Another swordsman entered the arena. This time, he didn't take defensive measures, nor did he attack with his sword. Instead, he used light swordsmanship coupled with light footwork. He constantly attacked from various angles. At a glance, he was everywhere on the arena. Could it be that you think you can contend against me by using such methods? I'll show you how wrong you are. Peng Quan sneered. His body moved, easily but effectively dodging his opponent's sword. Then, he slashed out with his sword. 3 inches of power exploded. There was no way to dodge, so he could only take it head-on. Under the explosion of power, his whole body flew out like a leaf. Control of power is not only used in the sword. It can also be used in footwork. Peng Quan said proudly. He hadn't used much energy in the 3 battles. Indeed, control of power was the control of all kinds of power in one's body. There was no specific direction to use it in. Be it swordsmanship, footwork, in short, as long as it could be used, it could be used. A truly powerful swordsman could control every part of his body and every bit of power as he wished. Pring Quan's third opponent wasn't injured. He was very skilled in light swordsmanship. When he was hit by the sword, he immediately used the force to retreat. Although his chi and blood were shaken, he was fine after a short rest. If no one else enters the arena, today's swordsmanship competition will end here, Ji Tianxiang said. Me. A voice rang out. Immediately after, a figure flickered like a dream and appeared on the fighting stage. Facing Peng Quan was Chu Mu. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 637. Not bad. You're very courageous. Peng Quan smiled and looked at Chu Mu. He had defeated his opponent 3 times in a row with a single strike each time. The consecutive victories made his confidence soar. His aura became stronger and sharper, and his gaze became sharper. In his opinion, after winning 3 consecutive battles so easily, there shouldn't be anyone else coming up. He didn't expect another one to come up. Chu Mu had his own thoughts. On the immemorial divine ship, he had seen Sidu Xiu and Yang Lai fight. He had comprehended something and grasped something. However, at that time, Chu Mu didn't know what it was. Now, after listening to Ji Tianxiang's explanation, Chu Mu understood that it was the so-called control of power. Vaguely, Chu Mu felt that his control of power had reached the advanced realm. However, he couldn't be sure if it was true or false without a comparison. After all, there were no records of this on the ancient Sword continent. There was no such cultivation method, so Chu Mu didn't know. The way to verify it was very simple. With Ji Tianxiang's eyesight, he could naturally tell if it was true or false. Moreover, Chu Mu didn't fight with Sidu Xiu and Yang Lai on the immemorial divine ship because he felt that he wasn't their match. Now it was a good opportunity. In the world of swordsmen, keeping a low profile wasn't the right way to do things. Only by showing one's talent and ability could one be valued more. Only then could one be valued more and obtain more cultivation resources. Building a cart behind closed doors couldn't reach the other shore of swordsmanship. "I'll let you attack first," said Peng Quan. Chu Mu didn't refuse. He casually drew his sword and swung it. Sword energy turned into a crescent moon and shot out. Peng Quan's feet slid and easily dodged Chu Mu's attack. His sword followed. There was strong confidence in his eyes. He could defeat Chu Mu with one strike and let these bumpkins know how powerful he was. They would know that the gap between them and the swordsmen of the immemorial world was insurmountable. At the 3-inch mark, the power was infused and then exploded. The entire process did not take more than 1/10 of a second. The speed of Peng Quan's sword suddenly increased by 30%. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, it was still not fast enough. His eyes could clearly capture the trajectory of his opponent's sword. It seemed that this was another benefit of cultivating tempering intent technique, which had significantly improved his 5 senses and allowed him to see swords more clearly. "I'm going to lose again." The swordsmen from the immemorial world all thought to themselves. As for the swordsmen from the 9 continents, they were all very nervous. No matter what the reason was, they all hoped that someone would be able to fight against the other party. Even if they couldn't defeat the other party, they would at least be able to withstand a few strikes. Immediately, a series of exclamations rang out. A hint of astonishment flashed across Ji Tianxiang's eyes. Peng Quan himself found it hard to believe that his sword actually missed. However, Peng Quan had a wealth of combat experience, and she had long stepped into the door of strength control. Her reaction was very fast, and her sword was very stable as it pierced towards Chu Mu's throat. Chu Mu's feet did not move, but he shifted his head to evade the sword. But Peng Quan's reaction was extremely fast. Her sword immediately changed direction to a stab and a slash. Everyone held their breaths and widened their eyes. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. In their eyes, Peng Quan's sword was undoubtedly very fast and sharp. Furthermore, the angle of her attack was very tricky. She was using all the strength she had grasped to her heart's content. Each sword was filled with terrifying power, and even the air was directly torn apart. However, Chu Mu only moved his feet in a small area, narrowly dodging Peng Quan's sword time and time again, causing Peng Quan's sword to miss. What made Ji Tianxiang even more surprised was that Chu Mu's dodging was all in accordance with Peng Quan's sword. As a result, the sword pressure from each of Peng Quan's attacks didn't affect Chu Mu at all. From this, it could be seen that Chu Mu's combat experience was incomparably rich. His talent in combat was even more terrifying to the extreme. He was certain that even if Chu Mu had not reached the level of strength control, once he counterattacked, he would still be able to defeat Peng Quan. In this world, there were always some incomprehensible existences that could defeat those stronger than them. For example, Chu Mu in front of him. For example, the person who possessed the Tianwu sword body. At first, Peng Quan was a little impatient. Then, she calmed down and relaxed her state of mind. Every time she attacked, her sword became smoother. The feeling of controlling her own strength became smoother, and she could feel some improvement in her control of her strength. Her sword, her movement, her footwork, all her various uses became smoother. Sometimes continuous, sometimes violent. Peng Quan's strength was steadily increasing. After experiencing it personally, Chu Mu's understanding of the so-called control of strength became clearer and more intuitive. Peng Quan's strength was ultimately still not enough. Chu Mu could not let her continue attacking like this. After dodging the sword, she instantly attacked. When this sword attack was unleashed, Ji Tianxiang could not help but stand up out of shock. It was a light sword strike. It was very ordinary, but it was soundless. Its speed was extremely fast. Before Peng Quan could even react, Chu Mu's counterattack had already ended. The sword lightly touched the body of Peng Quan's sword. Peng Quan immediately felt an irresistible force explode. Her sword flew out of her hand. Her palm was distorted, and she could not help but retreat. Her chest was stuffy, and her blood was in turmoil. She could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood before she felt better. The sword landed in the distance, making a piercing sound. The entire sword arts room was silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. "Thank you for letting me win." Chu Mu withdrew his sword, saluted, and said indifferently, leaving the arena. Advanced level. Peng Quan, who was standing there in a daze, muttered almost subconsciously with her eyes wide open. Advanced level. Ji Tianxiang did not say a word, but shouted in his heart. He was dumbfounded. After a long time, the dazed crowd finally reacted. One by one, they turned their heads with difficulty. Their stiff expressions and stiff gazes landed on Chu Mu. Their minds were in a mess. Even they themselves did not know what they were thinking or feeling at this moment. "How did you do it?" Peng Quan looked at Chu Mu with a trace of unwillingness and shock and asked. "It's not difficult." Chu Mu's short answer caused another strong impact on the crowd. "Today's sword arts lesson ends here. All of you can leave. You stay first," Ji Tianxiang suddenly said, indicating for Chu Mu to stay. "When I reach advanced level, I will look for you to fight again," Peng Quan said. He picked up his sword. There was a little dent at the blade of the sword. It was caused by Chu Mu's sword. Poor child. He only knew that Chu Mu's control of power had reached advanced level. He thought that it was just advanced level and not advanced level. Otherwise, he would not even have the slightest intention to challenge him. "Brother Chu, good job." Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan were very excited. When they walked past Chu Mu, they clenched their fists and said excitedly. The disciples all left. Only Chu Mu and instructor Ji Tianxiang were left in the sword arts lesson room. "What's your name?" Ji Tianxiang's voice was tinged with excitement. "Chu Mu." Chu Mu's answer was very indifferent. "It's hard to imagine, hard to imagine." "Chu Mu, tell me, how did you do it?" Ji Tianxiang's voice was still excited. He had already learned that there was no cultivation method for controlling power on the 9 continents. In other words, Chu Mu should not have come into contact with the domain of controlling power before. Now, he had reached advanced level. How incredible was that? Ji Tianxiang's excitement and the anticipation in his eyes made Chu Mu a little speechless. However, he still gave a brief explanation. Just by watching two primordial sword cultivators fight on the primordial divine ship, he was able to comprehend it with his own perception. Furthermore, he was able to grasp it in just over a month and reach a deeper level. Ji Tianxiang was already at a loss for words. Traces of jealousy appeared in his heart, but that jealousy was quickly replaced by another emotion, and that was joy. Actually, before this, although I did not know about controlling power, I have been strengthening my training in this area. Chu Mu explained. Indeed, controlling power and being a swordsman had some similarity. They could learn from each other. Chu Mu, who was a swordsman and had reached an extremely high level of attainment, could borrow the skills of a swordsman to cultivate power control that had similarities. However, in Ji Tianxiang's opinion, it was a humble way of saying it. The swordsmen of the primordial world had long known about the existence of controlling power and had begun to devote themselves to cultivating it. However, there were not many who could achieve it, only a small portion of the total number of swordsmen. Someone like Chu Mu, who had comprehended it on his own without receiving any guidance and had even reached advanced level after watching a few battles, was definitely one of a kind. Ji Tianxiang could swear that he had never heard of such a person. If someone had told him about the existence of such a genius before this, Ji Tianxiang would have cursed and slapped them twice. But now, he had the urge to slap himself twice to wake up. Chu Mu, remember, when you leave this place, don't let anyone know that you've reached the deep entry realm. Unless it's absolutely necessary, try your best to control it at the initial entry realm. Ji Tianxiang seemed to have thought of something and spoke with a serious tone. Although he did not understand why Ji Tianxiang said that, Chu Mu could feel the concern in Ji Tianxiang's words. Since you've already reached the advanced stage in terms of strength control, then you're qualified to apply for the Sword Venerable exam. Once you pass the exam, you'll become an elite disciple of the Sword Palace. However, your sword intent hasn't reached perfection yet, right? Not yet, Chu Mu said. His sword intent had not reached perfection, and his profound had not reached perfection. If it was not for his control of power at advanced level, it would be impossible for him to defeat Peng Quan. How many profound have you comprehended? Ji Tianxiang asked with a serious expression. 5, Chu Mu said. There were still a few that he had not specially comprehended. 5, that is to say, more than 5. Ji Tianxiang was shocked once again, and then he revealed a bitter smile. Perhaps in your world, the more profound the better, but in the primordial world, it is not advocated. It is more focused on the essence, not the breadth. Chu Mu immediately asked Ji Tianxiang for advice. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 638. Chu Mu learned a lot from the conversation with Ji Tianxiang. The essence of a profound was more important than the quantity. Too much would affect the profound and make it impure. As for the Sword Venerable test, Ji Tianxiang suggested that Chu Mu apply after he had comprehended his sword intent to perfection. In the bedroom of the sword tower, Chu Mu closed his eyes and pondered. He recalled the battles he had seen in the past and compared them one by one. Suddenly, he realized that he had overlooked the purity of the profound. On the ancient sword continent, if a swordsman was talented, he would comprehend one or two profound. The more profound one comprehended, the more talented he was. After fusing the profound, his power would be even more powerful. However, it was different in the immemorial world. Even the most talented swordsmen would not comprehend more profound. They had the ability, but they would spend most of their time on one profound. Unless they had reached the limit, they would only comprehend a second profound. This was completely different from the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent who comprehended several profound at the same time. On the immemorial divine ship, Situ Xiu and Yang Lai had only used one Upanishad from the beginning to the end. Although they were just regular Upanishads, their Upanishads were purer and more powerful. They weren't any weaker than mutated Upanishads. Then, Chu Mu recalled that Peng Quan had also used a regular profound. At that time, he had focused on controlling his power and neglected it. Now that he thought about it carefully, he realized that Peng Quan's profound was also very pure. The profound of heaven and earth was endless, but there was a limit to a person's strength. No matter how talented a person was, they would not be able to comprehend all the profound. Since that was the case, it was better to focus on one or two profound to fully excavate their potential and unleash their power to the maximum, reaching the true limit. Ji Tianxiang told Chu Mu that the more profound one comprehended, the more it would affect each other. Firstly, it would cause the speed of improvement of the profound to decrease. Secondly, it would cause the purity of the profound to be unable to be improved. To put it bluntly, the so-called variant profound was actually a level reached after the regular profound was continuously purified. In other words, the metal profundity comprehended by a powerful primordial sword artist was as pure as Chu Mu's ripping profundity. Chu Mu calculated. The tearing Upanishad, the illusionary Upanishad, the water Upanishad, the fire Upanishad, and the sky Upanishad were his main Upanishad. Besides, he also had the wood Upanishad, the earth Upanishad, the ice Upanishad, and the thunder Upanishad. At the very most, there were 9 profound meanings. If they were announced, it would be a shocking existence that no one had ever seen before. Although Chu Mu had cultivated only 5 of the 9 powers Upanishads, the other 4 powers Upanishads had slowed down his speed of comprehending power Upanishads, which prevented him from increasing the purity of his power Upanishad. His application of power Upanishads had stagnated. It was just that Chu Mu had not realized this point in the past. There was no such thing on the ancient sword continent either. Although Ji Tianxiang had told Chu Mu all this, he had not requested Chu Mu to abolish the profound he had comprehended. He had only given Chu Mu a suggestion to earn enough Sky Edge coins and enter the Sky Edge Sword Palace's Dream Recall Pavilion. It was said that one could obtain the correct guidance and see their future selves in the Dream Recall Pavilion. Dream Recall Pavilion. Chu Mu could not help but repeat. When he had heard of the Dream Recall Pavilion, he had been incomparably shocked. It was hard to imagine that there was such a miraculous existence in the world that could allow one to see their future selves. It was equivalent to clearing away many obstacles in advance, allowing one to take fewer detours and walk on the correct path faster. Even in the primordial world, even with the correct guidance of theoretical knowledge, every sword artist was different. It was like there were no 2 identical leaves in the world. Therefore, whether one's path was correct or not could only be determined by oneself. If one had a good master, they would be able to obtain better guidance. Naturally, they would be able to take fewer detours and walk on the correct path that belonged to them more easily. If one did not have a master, they could only rely on themselves to constantly move forward, walking on a winding path filled with obstacles. Only after a long time would they realize how they should move forward. The Dream Recall Pavilion was equivalent to allowing sword artists to know their own path decades or even centuries earlier. Then, they would be able to move forward, saving a lot of time. However, to enter the Dream Recall Pavilion, one had to pay 10,000 Sky Edge coins. Currently, Chu Mu did not even have a single Sky Edge coin. After passing the Sword Saint's test and becoming an elite disciple, I can obtain a reward of 100 Sky Edge coins. However, it is still far from enough. I need to complete missions to earn more Sky Edge coins. Chu Mu thought to himself, however, before that, I still need to raise my strength a step further and become even stronger before doing missions. After understanding what he needed to do, Chu Mu immediately left the sword tower and headed for the sword observation peak. The sword observation peak was a sacred cultivation ground that was open to the public. As long as one was a disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, they could go there to comprehend at will. There were no restrictions, and they did not need to pay any Sky Edge coins. Therefore, at every moment, there would always be a large number of sword artists gathering at the sword observation peak. When Chu Mu arrived at the sword observation peak, his eyes were filled with astonishment. The sword observation peak was a mountain peak, a very tall mountain peak. Standing before the sword observation peak, one would feel small and insignificant. The sword observation peak looked like a sword that pointed towards the vast sky. It was bare without any trees or grass, only countless rocks and gravel. The sword artists that were comprehending were not allowed to enter within 10 miles of the sword observation peak. As the distance was too close, they would not be able to see the entire sword observation peak and would not be able to comprehend anything. At this moment, the surrounding 10 miles of the sword observation peak was filled with sword artists. All of them brought their own praying mats and sat on the ground. They were 5 to 6 meters away from each other and did not disturb each other. Their eyes were fixed on the sword observation peak. They looked very focused and did not even blink. At this moment, Chu Mu stopped about 10 miles away from the sword observation peak. That was to say, between 10 miles and 10 miles, there were no extra seats for him to sit. The sword observation peak was 10,000 meters high and had a diameter of 1,000 meters. Thinking about it, if the sword observation peak was filled with people from 10 miles to 10 miles, how many people would there be? First, looking at the surrounding environment, Chu Mu took out a praying mat and sat down. His eyes fell on the sword observation peak, and he quickly drove away the distracting thoughts in his mind. Once again, Chu Mu benefited from his powerful soul. In one breath, Chu Mu forgot everything else and focused on the sword observation peak. In an instant, Chu Mu had a feeling that every rock on the sword observation peak was emitting a strong sword momentum and sword intent. They blended into one and rolled over, causing Chu Mu's soul to tremble. His powerful and solid spiritual world was also shaking. The prototype of the sword essence in his spiritual world gave out bursts of sword cries and trembled slightly. Even the gravel on the sword observation peak seemed to contain terrifying sword momentum and sword intent. They condensed into one and blended with the rocks, melting into a terrifying sword pressure that fell from the sky. The vibration of the spiritual world was even more obvious, and the sword cries of the prototype of the sword essence were even louder. This was not fear, but excitement, as if it had been activated. Chu Mu's soul was extremely powerful, and his spiritual world was many times larger than that of ordinary swordsmen. It was also many times more solid than that of ordinary swordsmen. This level of vibration could not hurt his spiritual world. Looking at the other swordsmen, he knew that this vibration was not meant to hurt them, but was a kind of training. Chu Mu's prototype of the sword essence was shaking, and so was the sword intent. Immediately, Chu Mu had a feeling that there were countless iron hammers pounding his prototype of the sword essence in a regular pattern. Each pounding caused the prototype of the sword essence to condense a little bit, and the sword intent contained in it seemed to be affected as well, becoming purer. Sword intent also had its own strength, which was its purity. The higher the strength, the more powerful it would be. For example, in the Heavenly Sword Gorge on the ancient Sword Continent, Chu Mu had received the continuous impact of the Heavenly Sword Gorge's still water sword intent for a year, causing his own sword intent to become more tenacious. In essence, it was a manifestation of the increase in strength. Chu Mu did not expect that the sword observation peak would bring him such a pleasant surprise. The sword pressure released from the sword observation peak grew stronger and stronger, gradually making Chu Mu feel uncomfortable. At this time, many swordsmen could not bear the sword pressure and left. The comprehension of the sword observation peak was not endless. Once a swordsman entered the state of comprehension, he would face the sword pressure released by the sword observation peak. Under normal circumstances, from the beginning of comprehension to the end of being unable to bear the sword pressure of the sword observation peak, it would take about 2 hours. However, Chu Mu had already been here for 2 hours, and the sword pressure was not so strong that he could not bear it. As time passed, as the fledgling form of the sword essence vibrated again and again, various insights about the sword emerged in his mind, deepening Chu Mu's understanding of the sword. The sword observation peak did not specifically target sword intent, nor did it specifically target other things. Instead, it was an open cultivation holy land that contained many kinds of comprehension. Comprehending here could improve one's sword intent, improve one's comprehension of the sword, and also improve one's swordsmanship attainments. The sword pressure increased to the extreme, and the sword observation peak in front of Chu Mu seemed to shake. Heaven and earth rumbled, and then, a strong light appeared on the sword observation peak. The sword observation peak shook violently and soared into the sky, turning into a huge sword. It seemed to be held in the hand of an invisible giant, and slashed fiercely at Chu Mu. The trajectory of this sword was simple, but it seemed to be made by nature. Chu Mu's mind moved, and the fledgling form of the sword essence turned into a huge sword to counterattack. The two swords collided again and again in the void, and countless sparks splashed out, like bright stars filling the void. It was very spectacular. The two swords clashed. The trajectory of each sword was simple, but it contained countless changes and many sword principles. The huge sword transformed from the sword observation peak became more mysterious and unpredictable. Gradually, Chu Mu felt powerless. He was hit by the sword and could not resist it. His whole body trembled as if he had been cut in half. He woke up with a start, only to find that the sword observation peak was still the sword observation peak. A 10,000-meter high mountain towered in front of him. Looking at the swordsmen around him, Chu Mu was sure that the scene just now was what he had comprehended, and it was not that the sword observation peak had really turned into a huge sword. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 639. From beginning to end, Chu Mu had used a total of 4 hours to comprehend the sword observing peak, 2 hours more than normal swordsmen. This situation was noticed by a few swordsmen. Although one could come to sword observation peak to study at any time, one still needed to wait for a second time after a period of time. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any effect and it would be a waste of time. Standing up and putting away the mat, Chu Mu took the opportunity to check on the fledgling sword soul in his mental world. He discovered that the fledgling sword soul was more condensed than 4 hours ago. It had increased by about 10%. It was very obvious. As for the sword intent, it had reached 82% and was even purer than before. Before he started studying sword observation peak, Chu Mu's sword intent was at 80%. In just 4 hours, his sword intent had increased by 20%. It had to be said that this was a godly speed. It was many times faster than the famous sword tower in the ancient sword continent. As expected of the primordial world, Chu Mu couldn't help but sigh. The cultivation environment of the primordial world was indeed many times better than the ancient sword continent. It was normal for the swordsmen here to be stronger than the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent. However, it was different now. After coming to the primordial world and enjoying the cultivation resources here, Chu Mu firmly believed that he could become stronger and go further than the swordsmen of the primordial world. At this speed, it won't take long for my sword intent to reach perfection. Chu Mu thought to himself as he left sword observation peak. If he was in the ancient sword continent, it would take at least a few years to comprehend sword intent to perfection. After returning to the sword tower, he was stopped by Jiang Chuan just as he was about to enter his bedroom. "Brother Chu, someone sent a card over just now. He specifically said that he wanted to give it to you." Jiang Chuan took out a card and handed it to Chu Mu. Chu Mu took it and saw that it was a challenge card. There were two types of challenges between the Sky Edge Sword Palace disciples. One was a casual challenge, which was to immediately challenge someone. After the person agreed, they would immediately go to the nearest arena and fight. The other was a more formal challenge, which was to issue a challenge card first. The second type of challenge was usually something that only the stronger swordsman would do. They would first send out a challenge card to show their respect. In fact, after receiving the challenge card, the other party couldn't reject it. Either they didn't accept the challenge card, or they had to accept the challenge. Otherwise, they would be despised by other swordsmen. Chu Mu did not know, and neither did Jiang Chuan. The owner of the challenge card was called Bai Zhongtian. The content of the card was very simple. It stated that the time of the challenge was tomorrow morning, and the location was Sky Edge Sword Palace's 98th arena. "I'll go and find out who this Bai Zhongtian is," Jiang Chuan said and immediately left the sword tower. 4 hours later, someone knocked on Chu Mu's bedroom door. Jiang Chuan stood in front of the door and looked at Chu Mu apologetically. "Brother Chu, I'm really sorry. Let me take this challenge." "Why?" Chu Mu was puzzled. After Jiang Chuan's explanation, Chu Mu finally understood the reason. It turned out that Bai Zhongtian was recognized as one of the top 100 official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. In terms of ranking, he was ranked 99th. Although this ranking had not been verified, it was recognized and very appropriate. However, when Jiang Chuan heard the news, his face turned green. The Sky Edge Sword Palace had a total of 2 million official disciples. Ignoring the small number, Bai Zhongtian could be ranked in the top 100 among these 2 million people. How terrifying was his strength! Jiang Chuan didn't believe that Chu Mu was a match for Bai Zhongtian, even if Chu Mu grasped the control of power. He also learned about the so-called challenge card. He knew that once he accepted the challenge card, it was equivalent to accepting the challenge. He was furious and anxious at the same time. Therefore, he immediately ran back. "Brother Chu, since I'm the one who accepted the challenge card, you have every reason to reject the challenge," Jiang Chuan said after he finished explaining. "Top 100 official disciples. I also want to see that kind of strength." Chu Mu smiled and said. The way he looked at Jiang Chuan changed. Jiang Chuan's actions made Chu Mu feel that he was someone he could befriend. Chu Mu wouldn't blindly make friends. To be his friend, one didn't have to have amazing talent, high cultivation, or powerful strength. However, it had to be to his liking. Obviously, Jiang Chuan already had such qualifications. "Alright." Jiang Chuan looked at Chu Mu's eyes and knew that he had made up his mind and couldn't change it. He could only smile bitterly and apologize in his heart. "Brother Jiang, you don't have to feel guilty. The reason Bai Zhongtian challenged me is probably because my control of power has reached the advanced realm. Even if I reject this time, he will still issue another challenge. Perhaps others will do the same. In short, a battle is unavoidable," Chu Mu said. Hearing Chu Mu's words, Jiang Chuan thought about it and felt a little better in his heart. "Today, I went to Sword Observation Peak to comprehend and learn something. Brother Jiang, if you have time, you can also go to Sword Observation Peak to take a look," Chu Mu said again. "Okay, I will definitely go back. I won't disturb Brother Chu. Tomorrow morning, I will go to Sword Battle Arena with Brother Chu," Jiang Chuan said and tactfully excused himself. Chu Mu closed the bedroom door and sat cross-legged on the bed. He recalled what he had learned from Sword Observation Peak and the swordsmanship he had fought with the giant sword. At the beginning, although the swordsmanship displayed by the giant sword was profound, it was still within the range that Chu Mu could bear. Later, it became more and more profound until it exceeded Chu Mu's level. Chu Mu was then defeated. In his mind, the profound swordsmanship displayed by the giant sword was clearly replaying over and over again. Chu Mu's swordsmanship was also improving at an indiscernible speed. At dawn, many swordsmen went to sword battle arena one after another. They had all heard that Bai Zhongtian, one of the top 100 official disciples, had issued a challenge card to a swordsman from one of the 9 small worlds. With Bai Zhongtian's strength, he could probably defeat his opponent with one strike. What's the point of such a challenge? I think so too. For Bai Zhongtian, only those who are ranked above him can make him fight to his heart's content. Those bumpkins from the small worlds are probably no match for us. What's the point of fighting with them? You don't know about this. Among the swordsmen from the small worlds there is an amazing person. How is he amazing? That swordsman is called Chu Mu. In terms of power control, he has already reached the advanced realm. I saw it with my own eyes. There was obviously a hint of bragging in his voice. Perhaps even this swordsman didn't know what he was bragging about. What? Advanced realm? Impossible! Exclamations rose one after another. No one believed that a swordsman from the small worlds had not only mastered power control, but also reached the advanced realm. It should be known that every one of them had devoted themselves to the cultivation of power control for at least 3 years. However, most of them were now stuck at the superficial level. Some of them had reached the advanced realm. It could be said that most of the official disciples were stuck outside the advanced realm. Even the top 100 official disciples were only rumored to have reached the advanced realm in terms of power control. However, it was not confirmed after all. What did they just hear? A swordsman from the small worlds had reached the advanced realm in terms of power control? Was it a fantasy? Or were they hallucinating? Although they had never been to the small worlds, they already knew that there was no cultivation of power control in the small world. In other words, the swordsman called Chu Mu had understood power control in a short period of time and reached the advanced realm. It was like a dream. If this is true, no wonder Bai Zhongtian would challenge him regardless of his status. Let's go. Let's speed up and get to the front. Chu Mu, a swordsman from the small worlds, has actually reached the advanced realm in terms of power control. This is really interesting. There aren't many people who are so interesting. We can't let him go. What's so interesting about him? He is most likely trying to please the crowd by resorting to trickery to gain fame. If he is fake, all the more we have to go and take a look. We have to see what kind of person has such courage. Many swordsmen who heard the news rushed to the number 98 arena. Even the swordsmen who were in the top 100 were moving. Although they were not going to fight personally, they might be able to gain something by watching from the side. Most importantly, they had doubts in their hearts. They did not believe that a swordsman from the small worlds could cultivate power control to the advanced realm in such a short period of time. After all, this news was spread by the swordsman from the same sword seminar room as Chu Mu. The Sky Edge Sword Palace did not have any official confirmation. Tianxiang, is the Chu Mu you mentioned not here yet? In a remote corner of the number 98 arena, 2 middle-aged men were sitting. One of them was the 4-star sword of Gojoseon, Ji Tianxiang. The other one looked slightly older and asked with a calm expression. The head instructor hasn't arrived yet, Ji Tianxiang replied in a respectful tone. Are you sure that his power control has really reached the advanced realm? The head instructor asked again. 100% sure, Ji Tianxiang said seriously. The head instructor nodded and did not say anything else. He sat there quietly, waiting for Chu Mu to arrive. There were more and more people around the number 98 arena. At this moment, a figure leaped over and landed on the arena. It was a young swordsman in a green robe with long hair. He looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. His eyes were bright and full of spirit. He was Bai Zhongtian. Is Chu Mu here yet? Bai Zhongtian asked. His voice was not loud, but it spread throughout the arena and fell into everyone's ears. Immediately, many people looked around, looking for Chu Mu. Chu Mu is here. Everyone, please make way. A voice rang out, instantly attracting the attention of all the swordsmen. The person who shouted was Jiang Chuan. Because the arena was crowded with at least 10,000 people, there was no way to enter. The swordsman consciously opened up a path for Chu Mu. Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian also took this opportunity to squeeze to the edge of the arena. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 640. On the 98 battle arena, two figures stood facing each other from a distance. The tens of thousands of swordsmen around the battle arena were focused on the battle arena, and no one spoke. He is the Chu Mu you mentioned, the teacher in charge said lightly. Yes, Ji Tianxiang said. Not bad. The teacher in charge gave a very general evaluation, but Ji Tianxiang knew that it was not easy for the teacher in charge to give a good evaluation. However, Chu Mu was qualified. I think you should have some understanding of me, Bai Zhongtian said. Bai Zhongtian spoke. Unknowingly, his tone carried a sliver of arrogance, as if he was looking down on Chu Mu from above. Because he was one of the top 100 official disciples, he was qualified to do so. I find it hard to believe that you have already reached the entry level in the field of power control. Chu Mu did not speak, so Bai Zhongtian continued. I will say the ugly words first. If you have not reached the entry level, and are just making up facts to make yourself famous, I will give you an unforgettable lesson. However, if you have really reached the entry level, I should be able to gain something from fighting with you. No matter what the final result is, I will pay you 100 Tianfeng coins as the price for challenging you. Although there was a trace of arrogance in Bai Zhongtian's tone, he did not mean to look down on Chu Mu. It was just his habitual pride as one of the top 100 disciples. Whether it is true or not, you will know very soon, Chu Mu replied lightly. Okay, you go first. Bai Zhongtian's eyes lit up and said. Chu Mu did not hold back. He unsheathed the desolate sky sword and stepped forward. It was as if he was skating on ice. His whole body moved forward quickly and smoothly. His sword stabbed out as fast as lightning and as fast as the aurora. What a fast sword! Silent and undetectable. Your swordsmanship is not bad. The teacher in charge's eyes lit up as he nodded. As soon as Chu Mu made his move, it immediately caused the tens of thousands of swordsmen below to be astonished. Amateurs were there for the excitement, while experts were there for the skill. These swordsmen's attainments in swordsmanship were not bad. With a single glance, they could tell that Chu Mu's sword was as smooth as flowing water. It was like a heavenly steed soaring through the skies. Chu Mu made his move without holding back. Bai Zhongtian only felt a flash in front of his eyes. A cold star was already closing in on him. It was silent, but it shocked him. Bai Zhongtian's pupils contracted rapidly. His body automatically slid backward at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, he unsheathed his sword and swung it out casually, drawing a nearly perfect trajectory in an attempt to block Chu Mu's sword. However, Chu Mu's wrist shook slightly. His entire body seemed to have become one with the sword in his hand. With an almost undetectable movement, he easily caused Bai Zhongtian's sword to miss and the sword to come closer. As the sword approached, Chu Mu used his power to control it. His power exploded. With the sword origin and physical strength as the main force, and the sword intent and profound as the support, the speed of the sword doubled. The space seemed to be pierced through. Bai Zhongtian only felt a piercing pain in his throat, as if he had been stabbed by a needle. He was shocked. Advanced Realm Sword. The teacher in charge's pupils contracted. He subconsciously clenched his fists. He was shocked. Ji Tianxiang, on the other hand, smiled and nodded to himself. He had a look of appreciation on his face. He could tell that Chu Mu had only used the Advanced Realm Sword, and not the Advanced Realm Sword. The Advanced Realm Sword was already very shocking. If he had used the Advanced Realm Sword, it would not only be shocking, but it would also cause unnecessary jealousy. It would lead to some terrible consequences, and he might even be assassinated. This was also why Ji Tianxiang had told Chu Mu not to use the Advanced Realm Sword's power control unless it was absolutely necessary. He should only use the Advanced Realm Sword in front of others. No wonder he was one of the top 100 among the 2 million disciples. Although Bai Zhongtian's power control had not reached the Advanced Realm Sword, he was far better than Chu Mu in other aspects. His speed suddenly exploded. When Chu Mu's sword was about to touch his throat, he turned into a flowing light and quickly retreated. He left behind an afterimage which was pierced through by Chu Mu's sword and then shattered. The control of power was very important, but it was only a part of a swordsman's power. It was not the whole of it. Only when all the parts of a swordsman's power were improved could the overall power be improved. For example, a wooden bucket was made of many planks. If one of the planks was too short, the bucket would not be able to hold much water. If some of the planks were too long, the bucket would not be able to hold as much water as the longest plank. Only when the planks were flat could the bucket be filled. Chu Mu did not chase after him. Good. In terms of power control, you have really reached the Advanced Realm Sword. Bai Zhongtian was very happy. His tone was a little excited, and there was a hint of admiration. The tens of thousands of swordsmen around the arena were also very surprised. Among them, there were very few who had seen Chu Mu reach the Advanced Realm with their own eyes. The others had only heard about it. Now that they had seen with their own eyes that Chu Mu's power control had indeed reached the Advanced Realm, they were all shocked. Although I have not reached the Advanced Realm, I am far better than you in other aspects. Bai Zhongtian said in an excited tone, "If I am not wrong, your sword intent and profound meaning have not reached the perfect realm. Although your power control has made your sword more powerful, you are still not my match now." As he spoke, Bai Zhongtian rushed forward. A few afterimages were hard to distinguish. In the blink of an eye, he appeared around Chu Mu and attacked with his sword. Bai Zhongtian's speed was very fast. When his sword was an inch away from Chu Mu, he poured his power and then exploded. The sound was shocking and his aura was monstrous. He let out an earth-shattering roar. Chu Mu's reaction was even faster. When he moved his feet and dodged Bai Zhongtian's sword, he raised his sword diagonally. It was still as fast as lightning and silent. When the sword touched Bai Zhongtian's protective sword aura, its power exploded weakly. After tearing through the protective sword aura, it quickly dissipated. But when it was about to touch Bai Zhongtian's skin, it gathered and exploded again. Bai Zhongtian's afterimages were instantly shattered, but his real body appeared behind Chu Mu. He unsheathed his sword, and the sword light was sharp. Streaks of light descended like a storm, attacking Chu Mu's entire body. When each sword light was an inch away from Chu Mu, it poured its power and then exploded. Its speed increased rapidly, and its aura was terrifying. When dozens of sword light were released at the same time, it was as if the mountains were collapsing. The application of power control was not only on the sword. It could also be used on footwork. It could even be used on the sword's sword chi, sword light, and so on. However, in order to do this, the swordsman needed to have enough understanding and control. Dozens of sword light exploded at the same time. Its power was too terrifying. It was as if they were going to pierce through Chu Mu's body and leave him riddled with holes. Chu Mu's pupils contracted instantly. His mind, which had been tempered by tempering intense skill, filled the surroundings. Together with his eyes, the speed of the dozens of sword light suddenly decreased significantly. The trajectories were faintly discernible, and Chu Mu could judge them. Shifting his feet in a small area, Chu Mu's body was like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea. Swaying among the dozens of violent sword light, he made use of the gaps between the leaves like a light breeze. He shot out unscathed, and his sword pierced towards Bai Zhongtian silently. It was as if the sword was shuttling through the void. It was hard to tell if it was real or fake, and it was faintly discernible. It made Bai Zhongtian unable to determine where the sword would land. Good! With a low roar, Bai Zhongtian advanced instead of retreating. As if riding the wind, his body suddenly leaped into the air. Chu Mu's sword naturally followed, and his sword pierced through the air like a fairy. Bai Zhongtian waved his sword, and countless sword shadows splashed out. The dense sword shadows were all shattered by Chu Mu's sword. Bai Zhongtian's afterimages were also shattered in an instant, and his real body appeared on the other side once again. It was very strange. Below the arena, tens of thousands of swordsmen held their breaths and focused on the battle between Chu Mu and Bai Zhongtian. Every movement of Chu Mu's was integrated with the control of the entry-level power. The power that erupted in an instant was shocking. On the other hand, Bai Zhongtian's foundation was deep and his strength was strong. He was far above Chu Mu, and his battle experience was incomparably rich. Coupled with his control of the power that erupted was not weak at all. The battle between the two was mesmerizing to the audience. This Chu Mu's control of power has not only reached the entry level, but he is also very proficient in the use of the entry-level power. It's as if he has been immersed in it for many years. It's hard to believe that he only used a little more than a month to reach this step, the head instructor murmured. The head instructor murmured. Disbelief filled his face. A swordsman from a small world actually possesses such talent. That's just too shocking. Ji Tianxiang smiled at the side, and there was a hint of pride in his expression. It was as if Chu Mu was nurtured by him. Tianxiang, after his battle with Bai Zhongtian is over, bring him to see me, the head instructor said. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward, and his figure quickly faded. Only a shadow was left on the spot, and he appeared thousands of meters away and quickly left. The battle between Chu Mu and Bai Zhongtian was still ongoing. Bai Zhongtian's goal was to experience the power of the entry-level power. The other swordsmen who had reached the entry level were all stronger than him. They could defeat him with just a few moves, and he could not deeply experience the power of the entry-level power. Chu Mu had reached the entry level, but his overall strength was not as good as Bai Zhongtian's. He was a very suitable opponent. Fight, fight, fight. Bai Zhongtian's strength brought great pressure to Chu Mu. Under this pressure, Chu Mu's potential was constantly stimulated. The swordsmanship that he had comprehended at Sword Observation Peak was also integrated into his own swordsmanship, causing his swordsmanship attainments to begin to improve. Every sword move became more profound. Under Chu Mu's continuous use of the entry-level power, he became more and more proficient. It was almost instinctive. Bai Zhongtian used Chu Mu as a sparring partner and had a deep understanding of the entry-level power. Chu Mu also used Bai Zhongtian as a sparring partner. He displayed his swordsmanship to his heart's content, stimulating his own potential bit by bit and becoming stronger. The tens of thousands of swordsmen below the arena were mesmerized. Their hearts were stimulated and shocked time and time again. This was the impact that Chu Mu had brought. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 641. With a swoosh, Bai Zhongtian's afterimage was shattered again. A strand of hair was blown away by the wind and turned into powder. Bai Zhongtian's figure appeared in another place. A strand of hair was missing from his forehead. The sword attack just now had almost hit his forehead. He was shocked. He had gained something from this battle, but Chu Mu was still improving. However, Chu Mu's improvement seemed to be greater than his. In the beginning, Chu Mu's sword could only shatter Bai Zhongtian's afterimage. Now, not only did he shatter the afterimage, he even cut off a strand of hair from his forehead. His improvement was obvious. Stop! Seeing that Chu Mu seemed to want to continue attacking, Bai Zhongtian quickly yelled, and put his sword back into its sheath. Today, I've gained a lot from fighting you. Although your strength isn't as good as mine, your potential is extremely shocking. I believe that if I give you a bit more time, you will definitely be able to make me use my true strength to fight. What he meant was that Bai Zhongtian had not used his true strength to fight with Chu Mu. Chu Mu was not surprised and did not reveal any strange expression. Bai Zhongtian must be very strong to be able to enter the top 100 among the 2 million disciples. I can tell you that I only used 30% of my strength, because my goal was only to experience the Gate Realm. Bai Zhongtian continued, I said before that if you really reach the Gate Realm, I will definitely gain something from fighting with you. You deserve these 100 Sky Edge coins. As he spoke, Bai Zhongtian waved his left hand and pieces of Sky Edge coins flew out. 100 Sky Edge coins flew in a straight line towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu swept his left hand and all 100 Sky Edge coins entered the spatial ring on his finger. In the immemorial world, a low-grade spatial ring was like a top-grade spatial bracelet on the ancient sword continent. Basically, any swordsman with some strength would have one. As for a mid-grade spatial ring, it was relatively more precious. However, it was hard to tell the difference between a high-grade spatial ring from its appearance. Therefore, Chu Mu's possession of a spatial ring did not cause any commotion. I hope you can improve your strength as soon as possible. Another day, let's fight to our heart's content. Bai Zhongtian's tone was less arrogant and more respectful. No matter which world it was, the strong would always be respected. Chu Mu was still not a strong person, but he had shown the potential to become one. That kind of talent was admirable, and Bai Zhongtian was no exception. That day will come. Chu Mu replied with a smile. He did not feel dejected because of Bai Zhongtian's strength, nor did he feel happy because of Bai Zhongtian's affirmation. Everything was so indifferent. See you again. Bai Zhongtian performed a sword salute to Chu Mu and leaped up. His sleeves waved downwards as if he had transformed into a giant rock. He leaped over the crowd and left quickly. Although they couldn't fly, the swordsmen had created all sorts of techniques that could allow them to accelerate their flight over short distances. Although I didn't fight personally, I learned something from watching the battle. I'll go back and study it. The swordsmen who were in the top 100 like Bai Zhongtian quickly left. Chu Mu, follow me. Just as Chu Mu was about to walk down the battle arena, he heard a voice that was not very clear. He turned around and saw instructor Ji Tianxiang in the corner. Changing direction, Chu Mu used his movement technique to pass through the crowd and head towards Ji Tianxiang. Many of the swordsmen that planned on making friends with Chu Mu and then asking for guidance and entering the realm were all startled. They chased after them, but when they saw Ji Tianxiang, they stopped and watched Chu Mu and Ji Tianxiang leave. Don't ask anything. I'll take you to see someone, Ji Tianxiang said as he walked. Chu Mu nodded and followed Ji Tianxiang forward. Although they were walking, their pace was very fast. It looked like their legs had turned into high-speed wheels. With 2 whooshes, they quickly disappeared into the distance, leaving only 2 figures behind. About an hour later, Ji Tianxiang's speed slowed down to a walk. Chu Mu also slowed down and finally stopped in front of a simple and unadorned sword tower. Head instructor, I brought Chu Mu. Ji Tianxiang loudly reported outside the sword tower. Chu Mu was shocked. Head instructor. The Sword Palace overview clearly stated that the Sky Edge Sword Palace was divided into odd job disciples, official disciples, and elite disciples. Odd job disciples didn't have much treatment. Only official disciples had instructors to guide them. As for elite disciples, they had grand instructors to guide them. But above grand instructors, there was an even higher level existence, and that was the head instructor. According to the Sword Palace overview, there were a total of 3 head instructors in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. He wondered which one Ji Tianxiang brought him to see. Come in. A gentle voice seemed to come from the void and entered Ji Tianxiang and Chu Mu's ears. The sword tower's seal opened naturally. Ji Tianxiang walked in front and Chu Mu followed behind him. They went straight to the second floor. The second floor was very spacious. There was a table and chairs. A figure was sitting cross-legged in front of the table. On the table there were 3 small cups and a wine jug. A thick fragrance of mixed wine wafted out from the small cups. It was very intoxicating. Chu Mu could only distinguish that the wine fragrance was mixed with many flavors, but he didn't know what it was brewed from. Chu Mu's gaze fell on the figure, and suddenly, he felt as if he had traveled through time and space. An ordinary face, eyes full of vicissitude. There seemed to be a myriad of mysteries in the eyes, and stars were evolving in them. Chu Mu felt as if he was being sucked in. "Since you're here, sit down." A calm and gentle voice rang out. Chu Mu was startled and suddenly sobered up. Everything in front of him disappeared. The figure was an ordinary middle-aged man with a gentle smile in his eyes. The crow's feet at the corner of his eyes explained the vicissitudes of life. His eyebrows and sideburns were white, as if telling others that he had a very rich experience. "Yes." Ji Tianxiang sat down respectfully. Chu Mu also sat down after performing a sword salute. "How is the Sky Edge Sword Palace?" the head instructor suddenly asked. "I'm still not sure." Chu Mu thought for a moment and replied. "Drink." The head instructor's tone was still as gentle as before. He raised the small cup in front of him. Chu Mu didn't stand on ceremony. He raised the small cup, and the thick fragrance of mixed wine rushed into his nostrils. Chu Mu only felt that he was refreshed and full of energy, as if he was about to break through his limits. He took a sip, and an indescribable taste bloomed in his mouth. It was very complicated. The wine flowed down his throat and into his stomach, turning into a clear stream that instantly rushed up. Before Chu Mu could react, it rushed into his spiritual world and spread out like a wave. After circling around, the clear stream surged into the embryonic sword soul in the middle and disappeared, as if it was absorbed. The feeling of being refreshed became more and more obvious, and his spirit became more and more full. Then, Chu Mu felt as if his soul had left his body and seen through the mysteries of heaven and earth. That feeling only lasted for a moment, but it made him addicted and unable to extricate himself. From the head instructor and Ji Tianxiang's line of sight, they could see that Chu Mu's eyes were closed, and his face was filled with deep intoxication. They didn't make a sound. This wine was not ordinary. A swordsman with a low cultivation level would definitely gain something from drinking it for the first time. After about 15 minutes, Chu Mu leisurely woke up. He opened his eyes, which seemed to be clearer. "It feels like I've cultivated tempering intent technique again. The strength of my spiritual will has increased a lot." Chu Mu immediately felt the change in his spiritual will. Although it could only cover a range of 100 meters, it was more subtle. "Thank you, head instructor." Chu Mu saluted with his sword again. He understood that it must have something to do with the wine. If a small cup could achieve the effect of cultivating tempering intent technique, this wine must be extraordinary. "I haven't experienced the feeling of being shocked for many years. You've made me experience it again." The teacher-in-chief smiled and said, "The cultivation environment and resources in the small world can't be compared to those in the Archean world. People born in the small world can't be compared to swordsmen in the Archean world in terms of talent. But there are always exceptions, and you are one of them." "You're overpraising me, head instructor," Chu Mu said. "You should still be very unfamiliar with the immemorial world. There is no need to rush to understand it. As your strength increases, you will naturally understand. The immemorial world is very big. Even at my level, I only understand a small part of it." The head instructor said slowly, "However, your talent is destined to be extraordinary. So, there are some things that I need to tell you in advance." Chu Mu stared at the head instructor seriously, waiting for him to continue. In the past, the human tribe was the leader of the 100 tribes in the Archean world. But now we're declining in the Archean world. We've lost a large part of our territory. We can only defend the last few territories and become one of the small tribes. The head instructor's tone was calm, but there was a kind of sadness in it. The God tribe, the heavenly demon tribe, and the earth demon tribe are the 3 major tribes. If there's a great genius in the human tribe, once the news gets out, the 3 tribes will definitely assassinate him. It's been like this since ancient times. This is also why I don't want you to reveal that you've entered the advanced level. Ji Tianxiang followed the head instructor's words and said to Chu Mu, if the 3 major tribes know that you've reached the advanced level in just over a month, they will definitely send experts to assassinate you. But if you're just entering the advanced level, they won't act so quickly. They will usually continue to observe you to confirm if you're a threat to them. They won't send experts either. At most, they'll send some experts. As long as you're careful, you can treat it as a form of training. Moreover, this is the Sky Edge Sword Palace. It won't be easy for them to enter. From now on, you have 3 chances to enter the Sword Cleansing Pool and the mysterious Sky Wall. If you can pass the Sword Venerable's test and become an elite disciple in half a year, I'll give you 1 chance to enter the Dream Recall Tower, the head instructor said. Ji Tianxiang's body shook. Chu Mu's body also shook. The head instructor's words were too sudden and the content was too shocking. Both of them understood that the head instructor wanted to nurture Chu Mu. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 642. The teacher-in-chief's words had a great impact on Chu Mu. It turned out that in the immemorial world, there were many other races besides the human race. It turned out that in the immemorial world, the human race was no longer the overlord and had declined. All of this seemed to be very close to Chu Mu, but it was also very far away. This was because he wasn't qualified to participate in the competition between races. He didn't even have the qualifications to understand it in detail. Only by constantly increasing his strength and becoming stronger would he be qualified to participate in the competition. After sorting out his thoughts, Chu Mu left the sword tower again and followed the map to the sword cleansing pool. Along the way, some swordsmen met Chu Mu. If they were from the 9 small worlds, they would nod at Chu Mu or even greet him. If they were from the immemorial world, they would stare at Chu Mu as if they wanted to see if Chu Mu had 3 heads and 6 arms, or if there was something strange about him. They wanted to see how he could cultivate his strength to the boundary realm in such a short time. It was undeniable that Chu Mu brought a great shock. The tens of thousands of swordsmen who witnessed it spread the news and soon, it spread throughout the entire Sky Edge Sword Palace. Other than those disciples who weren't in the Sky Edge Sword Palace or in seclusion, basically everyone knew about it. Even some of the elite disciples were aware of the news. You are Chu Mu? The deacon of the sword cleansing pool looked at the Sky Edge Sword token in his hand, and then looked at Chu Mu before asking. Yes. Chu Mu nodded. Yes, you have 3 free chances to enter the sword cleansing pool. After 3 times, you will have to pay 200 Sky Edge coins each time. Of course, if you become an elite disciple, you can enter the sword cleansing pool at any time. The deacon's eyelids trembled as he spoke casually. He handed the Sky Edge sword token back to Chu Mu and said, Go in. If there are no seats, wait first. Remember, no fighting is allowed in the sword cleansing pool. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences. After putting away the sword token, Chu Mu walked into the sword cleansing pool. The sword observation peak was a mountain while the sword cleansing pool was a pool of calm water. The sword cleansing pond was very large, and it looked like a huge lake. The water was clear, and one could see the bottom with a single glance. It was very calm, without any ripples. Traces of a peculiar aura were constantly being emitted from the sword cleansing pool, giving people an indescribable feeling. On the incomparably huge and boundless sword-cleansing pool, lotus leaves floated everywhere. It was as if there was an invisible hand slowly pushing those lotus leaves from below. Strangely, wherever the lotus leaves floated past, there was not the slightest ripple. It looked like stagnant water, but it gave people a feeling that it was full of vitality. At the edge of the sword-cleansing pool, there were several people sitting about 3 to 4 meters apart. They were all staring at the sword-cleansing pool with their eyes shining brightly and dimly, as if they were demonstrating various mysteries. As far as the eye could see, the edge of the sword-cleansing pool was filled with people. There were no empty seats at all. Chu Mu had no choice but to continue walking forward, circling around the sword-cleansing pool in search of a location. The Sky Edge Sword Palace had 2 million official disciples, but it was unclear how many elite disciples there were. Even if one had to pay 200 Sky Edge coins to comprehend in the sword-cleansing pool, there were still many disciples who were willing to pay, not to mention elite disciples who were free. Fortunately, the sword-cleansing pool was big enough. After walking for a while, Chu Mu saw an empty spot and immediately walked over. "Wait!" A low shout came from behind. Chu Mu turned around and saw a figure rushing over like a gust of wind. "That spot is mine." Chu Mu quickly took a few steps forward and stood at that spot, then slowly sat down. Only then did that figure appear beside the spot, staring at Chu Mu with a murderous aura in his eyes. It was as if he was a ferocious beast that wanted to devour Chu Mu. That person stood behind Chu Mu for a dozen breaths before he snorted and left, continuing to search for a spot. As soon as Chu Mu sat down, he had a strange feeling. The distracting thoughts in his mind were quickly eliminated, and the pool water in front of him seemed to have become clearer. He could see the bottom at a glance, but it was also like a bottomless abyss with no end in sight. Chu Mu didn't even need to take the initiative. The embryonic form of the sword soul in his spiritual world trembled. Under Chu Mu's gaze, the sword-cleansing pool in front of him seemed to have a slight ripple that spread out. A figure slowly appeared, going from blurry to clear. It was Chu Mu's reflection. That reflection seemed to be endowed with a unique life and actually came to life. It was as if there was another Chu Mu at the bottom of the pool. Chu Mu at the bottom of the pool winked and smiled at Chu Mu at the edge of the sword-cleansing pool, then he stood up from his cross-legged position. It was unknown when, but a sword had appeared in his hand. It was in the style of the 8-sided Sky Desolation sword. The smile on his face disappeared, and his expression became calm without any ripples. He took a step forward, gently waved the sword in his hand, and made a starting gesture of swordsmanship. Then, Chu Mu stabbed out with his sword and practiced the most primitive basic swordsmanship. His movements at the beginning were somewhat crooked. As Chu Mu was practicing swordsmanship in the sword-cleansing pool, a figure seemed to have appeared in Chu Mu's spiritual world above the sword-cleansing pool. It was also practicing the most primitive basic swordsmanship. The sword in its hand was the embryonic form of the sword soul. Every sword stroke, every movement, and even every detail of the figure in the spiritual world was the same as the figure reflected in the sword-cleansing pool. It was as if they were the same person. Sword after sword, over and over again, the movements became more precise and stable. The most primitive basic swordsmanship was displayed to its fullest. As the swordsmanship was cultivated, Chu Mu found that the basic swordsmanship had undergone subtle changes. If it was seen by others, it would not be obvious, but Chu Mu could tell the difference, because that was his personal experience. On Earth, when one became an apprentice and learned sword arts, one had to start from the most primitive basic sword arts until they were extremely proficient. Only then would one make slight changes to the basic sword arts according to one's own characteristics, allowing the basic sword arts to be more flexible and powerful. The reflection in the sword-cleansing pool seemed to be replaying the process of Chu Mu's sword practice one by one, reliving the memories buried deep in his mind. Looking at the reflection in the sword-cleansing pool, Chu Mu had a strange feeling, as if he was reliving the process of learning and practicing the sword. The sword cleansing pool, the sword cleansing pool, cleansing the heart to train the sword, cleansing the sword to train the heart and the sword as one. The impurities in the heart and the sword were gradually removed by the mystical power of the sword cleansing pool. Every swordsman who meditated in the sword cleansing pool would not necessarily see the same thing. Most of the time, they would start with the aspect that the swordsman was most proud of. Only then would they be able to achieve a better comprehension effect. As for the effect of comprehension, it was related to the soul of the swordsman. A swordsman with a powerful soul would often have a better comprehension effect. Under the sword cleansing pool, Chu Mu's reflection was still practicing his swordsmanship. One stroke after another, over and over again, as if he did not know what fatigue was. The next stroke of the swordsmanship would have subtle changes compared to the previous one, and he was improving all the time. The world of swordsmanship was endless. The swordsmanship of Chu Mu's reflection in the sword-cleansing pool became more and more fierce. It had integrated the essence of the laceration profound meaning that he comprehended in the palace of all sources. Every stroke had an extremely sharp edge that could cut through anything. Gradually, the sword became more harmonious and was no longer as sharp as before. However, the power did not decrease, but increased instead. That was because the sharpness was restrained. It was a swordsmanship that encompassed everything. In Chu Mu's spiritual world, the reflection holding the embryonic form of the sword soul continued to practice over and over again, tirelessly. As he cultivated, the embryonic form of the sword soul also solidified little by little, and the sword essence contained in it steadily increased. Time passed slowly. A group of swordsmen beside Chu Mu left, and another group came. However, Chu Mu was still immersed in his comprehension. His eyes never blinked as he stared at the surface of the sword-cleansing pool. His powerful soul allowed him to stay in a state of comprehension for a long time. One did not know how long one cultivated. Soon, a day had passed. The sword-cleansing pool in front of Chu Mu's eyes rippled again. Wherever the ripples passed, the reflection became blurred and disappeared. Chu Mu also woke up. This kind of comprehension couldn't be continued forever. Instead, it depended on the strength of one's soul. The amount of time it could take could be long or short. A normal sword artist could only comprehend for 4 to 6 hours. Chu Mu, on the other hand, could spend an entire day comprehending. 90% sword essence. After waking up, Chu Mu did not immediately get up and leave. Instead, he checked the changes in his body and was immediately shocked. His comprehension at sword observation peak had increased his sword essence from 80% to 82%. Now, his comprehension at the sword cleansing pool had increased his sword essence from 82% to 90%. This speed of improvement was too shocking. So I still have 2 chances. Does that mean I can improve my comprehension of sword essence to perfection? Thinking of this, Chu Mu was slightly excited. Once his sword essence reached perfection, his strength would definitely increase significantly. In that case, the mysterious sky wall should be of great help to the comprehension of profound meanings. Perhaps the 3 free chances to comprehend the mysterious sky wall would allow 1 or 2 of his profound meanings to reach perfection. Perfection of sword essence, perfection of profound meaning, coupled with advanced control of power, Chu Mu's strength would increase by more than 10 times. Standing up and turning around, Chu Mu strode toward the exit of the sword-cleansing pool. Subconsciously, he swung his hand in place of a sword and activated the sword technique domain. Chu Mu was stunned again, somewhat in disbelief. Stopping and calming his mind, Chu Mu once again swung his hand in place of a sword and activated the sword technique domain. To his surprise, he discovered that within a 3-meter radius of his arm, light was distorted and refracted. There was a strange force constantly affecting it. Sword technique domain has actually reached the 3rd level. Chu Mu muttered to himself, full of disbelief and realization. He had never imagined that his comprehension at the sword-cleansing pool would bring him such great benefit. His sword essence had increased from 82% to 90%, and his sword technique domain had directly surpassed the peak of the second level to reach the third level. It's still not enough. I have to continue improving and become stronger. I have to apply for the Sword Venerable test as soon as possible and become an elite disciple. Only then can I come into contact with more secrets. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qigyan. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 643. As Chu Mu walked, a figure flashed in front of him. Someone was blocking his path. You finally came out. Now let's talk about this. You stole my spot and caused me to waste a lot of time and losses. The person blocking Chu Mu sneered. Chu Mu turned around and saw that it was the person who wanted to snatch the spot of the sword cleansing pool, but was one step slower. His words made Chu Mu laugh. How do I settle this? Chu Mu couldn't help but ask with a faint smile. Very simple. You have two choices. The other party revealed a mocking smile, and a sharp light shot out from his eyes. The first choice is to give me 1,000 sky edge coins as compensation. Then, I will not pursue this matter. It was a typical greedy demand. Chu Mu only had 100 sky edge coins now, and that was because of the challenge fee paid by Bai Zhongtian. Chu Mu didn't get angry. Instead, he asked calmly, "What's the second choice?" The second choice is a little unpleasant. The other party squinted his eyes and the sharp light became sharp. It was as if he wanted to pierce through Chu Mu's head. His tone also became cold. Go to the sword battle arena and speak with your strength. I will choose the second choice. Chu Mu said indifferently. Very good. You will regret it. The other party's pupils shrank and his expression became even colder. Soon after, he smiled and walked towards the nearby sword battle arena. It just so happens that my strength has increased. Chu Mu thought to himself and walked towards the nearby sword battle arena. There were two people fighting on the sword battle arena. Below the arena, there were thousands of swordsmen watching. Come down. I want to use this sword battle arena. The swordsman who threatened Chu Mu directly jumped onto the sword battle arena and shouted rudely. Who are you? The two swordsmen who were interrupted shouted angrily. I am Jean Mulei. I will say it again. I want to use the sword battle arena now. Get down immediately. Jean Mulei shouted without any trace of politeness. Jean Mulei. Chu Mu realized that when the swordsmen heard this name, their expressions all changed. The two swordsmen on the sword duel stage did not say anything and immediately jumped off the stage, giving it to Jean Mulei. This Jean Mulei seems to be infamous. Chu Mu thought to himself. This kind of person was either very powerful, so powerful that it was frightening, or he had a powerful backer with a powerful background. Chu Mu felt that Jean Mulei might be the latter. As for whether it was true or not, he would know after they fought. You come up. Jean Mulei pointed at Chu Mu and used a commanding tone. Chu Mu leaped and landed on the arena. Who is that? Seems like he offended Jean Mulei. How unlucky! Of all the people you could offend, you chose to offend Jean Mulei. Don't you know that Jean Mulei is a tyrant among the official disciples? Take out your sword. I will let you know how stupid it is to go up on the arena with me. Jean Mulei sneered. As soon as he finished speaking, a clanging sound was heard. He had already unsheathed his sword and thrusted it out. This sword was combined with his footwork and was extremely fast. It was like a bolt of lightning that pierced through the sky. When the sword was 2 inches away from Chu Mu, he poured in his power and exploded. Lightning flashed and thunder exploded. That sword was like a real bolt of lightning that split the sky and struck towards Chu Mu. It was extremely powerful. The power that Jean Mulei displayed was even stronger than Peng Quan. Among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, he was considered to be in the upper echelon. Chu Mu took a step forward like he was gliding on ice, causing Jean Muley's sword to miss. Jean Muley's reaction was extremely fast. He twisted his wrist, and the sword that was thrusting out was immediately sliced to the side. The power on top of the sword was even stronger and sharper. It seemed like it was going to cut off Chu Mu's head. However, the sharp sword missed again. Jean Muley saw a cold light from the corner of his eyes. It was soundless and extremely fast. The hair on his neck stood up, and he felt a chill down his spine. His protective sword aura was instantly torn apart. Just as Jean Muley was about to back off, the sword had already reached his body. It was too fast. Instantly, Jean Muley was shrouded by the shadow of death. If this sword landed, his neck would be cut off. Just as he was about to open his mouth and shout, Chu Mu twisted his wrist. The sword that was sliced out changed into a slap. He poured in his power and instantly exploded. The sword landed on Jean Muley's chest. Pung! Jean Muley's body suddenly shook. He flew out as if he was struck by lightning. The powerful power instantly went through his protective armor and landed on his chest. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His entire body spun in the air and landed on the arena. He looked extremely miserable. Below the arena, thousands of swordsmen were all dumbfounded. They stared at Chu Mu blankly. Jean Muley struggled to get up. He felt a burning pain in his chest every time he breathed. He spat out a mouthful of blood and with a pale face, he stared fiercely at Chu Mu. Leave your name. Chu Mu. Chu Mu glanced at Jean Muley and said indifferently. He jumped down from the arena and left in big strides. Chu Mu, he is Chu Mu, indeed powerful. That sword has really reached the advanced realm. The swordsmen were startled. They then started to discuss. They had heard of Chu Mu's name before, but they had never seen him in person. Therefore, before Chu Mu said his name, they did not know that he was Chu Mu. Chu Mu. Jean Muley's pale face was gloomy. His eyes were shining fiercely as he stared at Chu Mu's back. He gritted his teeth and shouted in a low voice. Before, Jean Muley didn't know Chu Mu. He had just finished a mission and came back. The moment he came back, he heard that an incredible person had appeared amongst the official disciples. This person came from one of the 9 small worlds. In a situation where the environment and resources weren't as good as theirs, this person only used a short month to train his strength control to the initial entry level in strength control. This kind of talent was simply unheard of. It was abnormally terrifying. At first, he thought that it was a lie. He did not know who had made it up. Now that he had experienced it himself, he knew that it was not a lie. It was the truth. Jean Muley had never thought that he would have a grudge with such a person. This matter is over, Jean Muley told himself secretly. Although he relied on his powerful background to dominate the official disciples and became a tyrant that no one dared to mess with, he was not stupid. He knew that a person like Chu Mu would definitely be valued. He would be heavily trained and his future achievements would not be low. Even if they could not become friends, it would be best not to become enemies. Have you heard? Jean Yiba offended Chu Mu and was sent flying by Chu Mu on the sword arena. What happened? Tell me the details. Jean Muley had always been known as a tyrant among the official disciples. Many swordsmen had been bullied by him before. They were angry but did not dare to say anything. Even swordsmen who were stronger than Jean Muley were not willing to have a conflict with him. They tolerated it as much as possible because Jean Muley had a powerful background. Now that they heard that Jean Muley had suffered a loss on the sword arena and was even sent flying by a single sword, they were all delighted. Especially the other person involved in this incident. It was Chu Mu who had been in the limelight recently. This incident had further increased the attention of the public and Chu Mu's reputation had increased greatly. This Chu Mu is indeed powerful. He has only been cultivating in our Sky Edge Sword Palace for slightly more than a month and his strength has already reached such a level. He defeated Jean Mulei with a single sword. It seems like his strength has already reached the standard of an official disciple. Jean Mulei is a narrow-minded person. He will definitely seek revenge after suffering a loss. Jean Mulei is nothing to worry about. The key is his background. If he wants to deal with Chu Mu, the current Chu Mu will not be able to handle it. He might even die prematurely. Don't worry. Although Jean Mulei is narrow-minded, he is not stupid. For a genius like Chu Mu, as long as he does not die prematurely, his future achievements will definitely surpass Jean Mulei. He is not someone that Jean Mulei can contend with. Jean Mulei, who was at the center of the incident, almost exploded in anger after hearing the discussions of the swordsman. He was indeed narrow-minded, and a narrow-minded person would not allow others to talk about him like that. However, there were too many people talking about him. No matter how capable Jean Mulei was, he could not deal with so many people. Moreover, Jean Mulei had already reported Chu Mu's incident to his background, which was his elder brother, Jean Yanlei. Not only did Jean Yanlei not allow Jean Mulei to seek revenge, he even asked Jean Mulei to represent him to recruit Chu Mu. This made Jean Mulei even more unhappy. What's the matter? Outside the sword tower, Chu Mu looked at Jean Mulei and said with an indifferent tone, I have already let bygones be bygones. Jean Mulei stared at Chu Mu and said with an unhappy face. Then, he sneered and said with an arrogant tone, You are very lucky to be favored by my elder brother. This is the invitation he gave you. As he spoke, a palm-sized card appeared in Jean Mulei's hand and he threw it out. It spun at high speed and cut through the air, drawing an arc in the air and shooting towards Chu Mu. Even if the top 100 disciples want to join my elder brother's demon-slaying battle team, they would have to go through many tests. You are very lucky. With this invitation, you can directly become a reserve member of the demon-slaying battle team. Once you become an elite disciple, you will directly become an official member of the demon-slaying battle team. Many people will be envious of you. Jean Mulei said with a weird tone, Keep that invitation well. It is a treasure that countless people will fight for. If you lose it, it will be a blasphemy to the demon-slaying battle team. The consequences will be severe. Chu Mu didn't even take the card. Instead, he flicked his finger and the card flew back to him. Since it is a treasure that countless people will fight for, I don't think I can afford to lose it, Chu Mu said indifferently. He turned around and walked into the sword tower, ignoring Jean Mulei. Stop! Jean Mulei caught the card and rushed forward. However, the seal of the sword tower was activated, preventing Jean Mulei from entering. He could only watch as Chu Mu disappeared in front of his eyes. Damn it! Jean Mulei kicked the seal of the sword tower fiercely. This was a mission given to him by his elder brother. He had to complete it and add new blood to the demon-slaying battle team. However, he messed it up. When he returned, he would definitely be scolded by his elder brother. Since you are so cruel, then don't blame me. Jean Mulei's eyes flickered. In order to not be scolded and take revenge on Chu Mu, he decided to make some changes to his report. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 644. From time to time, people would challenge the famous Chu Mu. Chu Mu would accept some challenges, while Chu Mu would refuse others because he felt that there was no need to challenge them. As time went by, Chu Mu entered the sword cleansing pool for the third time. The first time he entered the sword cleansing pool, the effect was the best. His sword intent increased from 82% to 90%, and his swordsmanship domain improved from the initial second level to the third level. The second time he entered the sword cleansing pool, the effect was weaker. His sword intent increased from 90% to 96%, and his swordsmanship domain improved from the initial third level to stable. Now it was Chu Mu's third time. It was also the last of the 3 free chances given by the teacher in charge. I hope my sword intent can be improved to perfection. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu sat cross-legged on an empty spot beside the sword-cleansing pool. All kinds of distracting thoughts were quickly eliminated from his mind, and he entered a state of emptiness. His eyes also became clear, as if he could see the bottom of the sword-cleansing pool. His essence, qi, and spirit became one. In an instant, Chu Mu's will seem to have merged with the sword-cleansing pool. Layers of ripples spread out on the surface of the sword-cleansing pool under Chu Mu's gaze. A figure appeared in the sword-cleansing pool again. It was Chu Mu's reflection. The reflection seemed to be endowed with a unique life. He seemed to smile at Chu Mu. He reached out and a sword appeared in his hand. It was the 8-sided Heavenly Desolation sword. Practicing the most primitive basic swordsmanship again, Chu Mu seemed to have personally experienced the process of learning and practicing swordsmanship until today. This was a kind of sublimation, a transformation that removed the impurities and retained the essences. Unknowingly, Chu Mu woke up again. Layers of ripples appeared in the sword-cleansing pool again. The ripples spread out and the reflection disappeared. Sword intent. As soon as he woke up, Chu Mu quickly checked himself. He was stunned. 99%, the improvement of sword intent from 96% to 99% was slower than the second time. It was also because 99% was the limit of Deshang's sword intent. If it broke through to 100%, it would be perfect sword intent. The difference between Deshang's sword intent and perfect sword intent was not only in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. It was not so easy to overcome. Chu Mu had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was as if it was natural, but also as if it was a sense of loss. Looks like I at least have to enter the sword purification pool to comprehend it once more before I'm able to improve my sword insight to perfection. Chu Mu thought to himself as he stood up and left the sword purification pool. Without stopping, Chu Mu did not return to the sword gauntlet. Instead, he headed straight for the profound heavenly wall. The Xiantian wall was not far from the sword cleansing pool, and it was only an hour's walk away. There was also a deacon in charge of the Xiantian wall. Just like the deacon at the sword cleansing pond, the deacon at the profound sky wall was notified as well, so he knew that Chu Mu had 3 free chances to enter the wall. Go in. After the deacon checked Chu Mu's heavenly edge sword token and confirmed Chu Mu's identity, he waved his hand and returned the sword token to Chu Mu. He smiled and said, "You can't cause trouble inside. If you have any conflicts, solve them outside. Also, I hope you will have a great harvest." "Thank you." Chu Mu put away the heavenly edge sword token and strode into the Xiantian wall. The sword observation peak was a mountain, the sword purification pool was a lake, and the Xiantian wall, as the name implied, was a mountain wall. When Chu Mu arrived in front of the Xiantian wall, he was immediately stunned. The huge mountain wall was as smooth as a polished mirror. There was not a single trace of it being man-made. It was as if it was naturally formed. The jade-colored mountain wall was at a 90-degree angle to the ground, standing upright on the ground. It felt as if a mountain had been split in half by a sword, leaving the other half behind. The swordsmen were facing the part that had been split in half. The Xiantian wall was 3,333 meters tall and 3,333 meters wide. 1 mile away from the Xiantian wall, there were seats for the swordsmen to comprehend. From 1 mile to 10 miles away, it could accommodate many swordsmen. The Xiantian wall was used to comprehend profundities. It was different from the sword purification pool on the sword observation peak. At a glance, there were so many figures sitting on the ground that Chu Mu was a bit dazzled. His gaze swept across like lightning and Chu Mu found an empty seat. His figure flashed and he quickly appeared there. At the same time, another figure flashed, only a bit slower than Chu Mu. "It's you again." Jean Muley gloomily stared at Chu Mu and gritted his teeth. Chu Mu looked at Jean Mulei indifferently and did not say a word. Don't be too proud. There will be a time when you cry, Jean Mulei said to Chu Mu fiercely. Chu Mu had already sat down and was facing the Xiantian wall, ignoring Jean Mulei. Jean Mulei's eyes were wide open and filled with an ominous glint. He looked as if he wanted to devour Chu Mu. His fists were clenched, and he wanted to pull out his sword and stab a hole in Chu Mu. After a while, Jean Mulei took a deep breath and loosened his clenched fists. The bulging veins on the back of his hands sank and calmed down. Humph! Jean Mulei snorted coldly. That voice carried traces of sword intent and rushed towards Chu Mu like a thunderstorm, pouring into Chu Mu's ears. However, Chu Mu's body did not move at all. Jean Mulei turned around and left unwillingly. Even though there was an empty seat not far away, he was not in the mood to comprehend the Xiantian wall anymore. Walking out of the Xiantian wall, Jean Mulei thought about how he was scolded by his big brother and blamed everything on Chu Mu. It seemed that ever since he met Chu Mu, he had not been happy about anything. However, he also thought about how he had slightly changed the truth and told his big brother. He vaguely said that Chu Mu was arrogant and did not put the demon-slaying battle team in his eyes. Right now, Chu Mu was fine. However, once he became an elite disciple and his big brother knew about it, he would definitely teach Chu Mu a lesson. His big brother was not him. Among the countless elite disciples, he was one of the founding members of the demon-slaying battle team. He was extremely powerful and unpredictable. Jean Mulei's appearance, threat and departure did not affect Chu Mu at all. No matter what the opponent did, Chu Mu would have to face it. Then, there were a few ways to deal with all kinds of troubles. Among them, the most direct and most fundamental way was to increase one's own strength. If one's own strength was tyrannical enough to make everyone respect him, then what kind of trouble would dare to find him? Therefore, increasing one's own strength was the most important thing. All of his attention was on the Xiantian wall. The mirror-like Xiantian wall seemed to reflect countless people's reflections. It seemed clear yet blurry at the same time. Staring at the Xiantian wall without blinking, Chu Mu's eyes blurred for a moment before becoming clear again. The Xiantian wall seemed to have undergone a strange change. Vaguely, Chu Mu realized that his own reflection on the Xiantian wall had become clearer. Then, he felt his body move. He uncontrollably floated towards the Xiantian wall, passing by everyone. However, no one paid attention to him. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu felt as if he had been sucked into the Xiantian wall. His original world seemed to have disappeared, and he had arrived in a completely new world. This world was filled with all kinds of energies and all kinds of mysteries. With a glance, Chu Mu felt as if he had arrived in a place filled with stars. The stars moved, gathered, and scattered. Each one of them was abnormally profound and unfathomable. It made Chu Mu feel as if he was lost in the boundless starry sky. After a while, Chu Mu regained his composure. He carefully looked around at the nebulas that seemed to be formed from countless stars. The colors of the nebulas were completely different. For example, red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, blue, purple, white, black, and so on. Some nebulas were relatively similar. If one didn't look carefully, one would think that they were the same. For example, some nebulas that emitted blue light had a different aura. That's the metal profound. Wind profound. Chu Mu carefully looked around, identifying them one by one. Each nebula represented a profound. After identifying them, Chu Mu was surprised to find that there weren't any variant profound like the ripping concept or the illusory concept. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder, cloud, and other conventional profound. In addition, there were also the snow profound, blood profound, mist profound, and other special profound. Whether it was a conventional profound or a special profound, they could all be summed up as the basic profound. There weren't any variant profound. Chu Mu couldn't help but recall what Ji Tianxiang had said. The so-called variant profound was actually just the power of the basic profound being purified over and over again. It was a form of constantly increasing power. For example, the swordsmen of the immemorial world wouldn't let their profound mutate because it wasn't necessary. Unfortunately, there isn't the space profound nebula. After searching for a while, Chu Mu couldn't help but feel regretful that he couldn't find the space profound nebula that he wanted the most. The space profound was one of the most supreme profound. Its power was extremely terrifying. Every 10% increase would increase its power by several times. It was understandable that there wasn't such a terrifying profound in the mysterious sky wall. If there isn't one, then I'll try to comprehend other profound. Chu Mu thought to himself. Among the 5 powers Upanishads I've cultivated, the ripping power Upanishad is the most profound one. It has almost reached 80% completion. However, there is no ripping power Upanishad here. Anyway, the ripping power Upanishad is based on metal power Upanishad and half of wind power Upanishad. As for whether the path is correct or not, I can't be sure right now. I'll have to wait until the future to find out. However, right now I should focus on increasing my strength. If I'm not strong enough, even if the path is correct, I won't have the chance to continue. Thinking of this, Chu Mu began to comprehend the metal profound nebula. He released his mind and directly entered the golden metal profound nebula. Suddenly, all kinds of mysterious mysteries of the metal profound nebula appeared in Chu Mu's mind. Chu Mu could clearly sense them. Then, he comprehended them one by one. From the perspective of others, Chu Mu was still sitting cross-legged 8 miles away from the mysterious sky wall. Like many other swordsmen, he seemed to have turned into a statue. His body was motionless and he was completely immersed in his comprehension. I recommend a new book, Immortal God. Summon a group of goddesses to conquer the world. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 645. Metal was full of sharpness and sharpness. When it reached the extreme, it could cut through anything in the world. It could be tough or soft. No matter what it was, it couldn't change its sharpness. As time went by, Chu Mu comprehended all kinds of ultimacies in the metal ultimacy nebula and merged them with the tearing ultimacy. However, the tearing ultimacy was a special variant ultimacy. It originated from half of the metal ultimacy and half of the wind ultimacy. Therefore, in order to improve the level of the tearing ultimacy, he had to improve both the metal ultimacy and the wind ultimacy at the same time. His spiritual consciousness withdrew from the metal ultimacy nebula and entered the wind ultimacy nebula. The wind ultimacy nebula was cyan in color. It seemed to contain countless cyan stars that were rotating at a high speed. All kinds of mysteries of the wind ultimacy flooded into Chu Mu's spiritual consciousness. Chu Mu's spiritual consciousness was like a sponge that absorbed water, constantly absorbing all kinds of mysteries of the wind ultimacy. Some of these mysteries were already comprehended by him, while some were not. The ultimacies that he had already comprehended deepened Chu Mu's understanding of the wind ultimacy. The ones that he hadn't comprehended were absorbed by Chu Mu to improve the level of the wind ultimacy. Chu Mu's soul was very powerful. It was much more powerful than that of ordinary swordsmen. Therefore, in terms of ultimacy, he was much more powerful than other swordsmen. Finally, Chu Mu comprehended the wind ultimacy to its limit. His spiritual consciousness withdrew from the wind ultimacy nebula. Then, Chu Mu immersed himself in the tearing ultimacy, merging the metal ultimacy and the wind ultimacy that he had comprehended. Comprehending, merging, and improving. Chu Mu didn't know when he woke up. He had finished comprehending this time. The tearing ultimacy had improved by leaps and bounds from 79% to 89%. The power of the tearing ultimacy had increased by 10 times. The effect was the best when comprehending it for the first time. Now that he was done, Chu Mu had a feeling that he had reached his limit and could not continue. He had to give up on the other profound meanings. From this point of view, the profound sky wall seemed to be inferior to the ancient sword continent's myriad origin palace. However, the myriad origin palace's assistance in comprehending profundities was only evident for those below Deshang's level. For those above Deshang's level, the myriad origin palace's assistance was minimal. In this aspect, it was incomparable to the profound sky wall. After the first attempt, Chu Mu got up and left the Xiantian wall, leaving that spot for others. Walking back to the Sword Tower district, Chu Mu went back to his own bedroom in the Sword Tower. Chu Mu recalled what he had learned from the sword washing pool and the Xiantian wall today and consolidated it. Even now, Chu Mu himself wasn't sure what level his strength had reached. The only thing he was certain of was that the current him was at least several times stronger than when he had first entered the primeval age. Chu Mu had given himself the position of an elite disciple. His goal was to pass the Sword Saint test as quickly as possible without affecting his foundation and become an elite disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Although he didn't know much about elite disciples, Chu Mu realized that only by becoming an elite disciple could he truly enter the primeval age and begin to have the qualifications to integrate into the primeval age. Only then would he be able to learn more mysteries and obtain more resources. It was like an official disciple being a swordsmithing apprentice. They were still stuck at the stage of assisting their master, but an elite disciple was no longer an apprentice and had become a qualified swordsmithing master. They were already qualified to forge swords on their own. Perhaps it was because of Chu Mu's influence and encouragement, but the swordsmen from the 9 continents, especially the ancient sword continent, became even more diligent. This was especially true for those swordsmen who felt that they were stronger than Chu Mu. They seemed to have been stimulated and desperately cultivated. However, they didn't have Chu Mu's talent, nor did they have Sky Edge coins. They could only go to Sword Observation Peak to comprehend and improve themselves. Afterwards, they would form temporary teams to take on missions and earn Sky Edge coins. They would then use enough Sky Edge coins to exchange for a chance to enter the Sword Cleansing Pool or the Profound Sky Wall. However, up until now, apart from Chu Mu, no other swordsman from the 9 continents had enough Sky Edge coins to enter the Sword Cleansing Pool or the Profound Sky Wall. This meant that they were destined to start later than Chu Mu in the primeval age. Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan, who lived in the same sword tower as Chu Mu, also went to Sword Observation Peak to comprehend and improve their strength. They formed teams with other swordsmen to take on missions and complete them outside the Sky Edge Sword Palace. In the entire sword tower, only Chu Mu remained. After comprehending, Chu Mu's sword intent stabilized at 99% and laceration profound at 89%. Walking to the first floor of the sword tower, which was spacious, Chu Mu pulled out his sword and practiced the basic swordsmanship. His sword domain, which had reached the peak of the 3rd level, was activated. Every sword move could affect the space within 3 meters, causing distortion and stagnation. For every sword move, Chu Mu used his power control, which was at the entry level. Although he was using the basic swordsmanship, such as stabbing, chopping, slashing, sweeping and other basic movements, these basic movements were not ordinary at all. Not only did Chu Mu make changes that were most suitable for him since he started learning the sword, but he also integrated his various experiences and understanding of the sword and swordsmanship. So, even a seemingly ordinary stab had a feeling of returning to simplicity and contained great power. The most primitive basic swordsmanship was the foundation of all swordsmen and also the foundation of all swordsmen. But after all, everyone was different. Their bones were different in size, height, thickness and toughness of muscles and tendons were different. In short, there were no 2 people who were exactly the same in this world. Everyone had their own characteristics and strength. If one wanted to apply the same knowledge to the best of their abilities, they would have to make adjustments and changes according to their own characteristics and strength. They would have to use the most suitable method to make it easier for them to use. A simple analogy was to stab a sword. It was very simple, just stabbing the sword out. But such a simple movement in the hands of a layman and an expert would have a completely different power. A sword stab required which muscles to use and how to exert force. Only then could the sword stab be faster, more stable, more accurate, and more powerful. It was just that different people, different height, different length and thickness of arms, different strength of muscles, and even some people's arms were more curved and some straighter. Therefore, in order to fully unleash the true power of the sword stab, the same movement would have a different range. It needed to be adjusted according to the actual situation of the individual. For this kind of adjustment, the guidance of others was supplementary. The most important thing was to experience it personally time and time again, carefully feeling the subtle differences and finding the most suitable method for oneself. It was easier to find people with great talent. It was more difficult to find people with average talent. They often had to put in more time and sweat to work hard. In terms of swordsmanship, Chu Mu was very talented. His master had said that he was born for the sword. At this moment, Chu Mu was practicing his swordsmanship. He activated his swordsmanship domain and integrated power control. The collision and fusion of two different systems allowed the power of each of his sword to be maximized. Every sword left a faint afterimage in the air, like a vacuum mark. It was as if the sword had pierced into space and carved out a transparent hole. This was because Chu Mu's sword was too fast and too powerful, causing a visual phenomenon. The space of the primordial world was more than 100 times stronger than that of the ancient sword continent. Even if the power of Chu Mu's sword was 100 times stronger, it would be difficult to cause any damage to the space of the primordial world. Stab, sweep, slash, lift, hack, flick. Chu Mu's every movement was not fast, allowing people to clearly see every detail of his movement. However, it gave people a feeling that there was nowhere to dodge. It was as if any of his sword could be adjusted at will and landed anywhere. He did as he pleased. Every sword strike felt as if it was made by the heavens. From the appearance alone, the power of each sword did not seem to be very strong. However, Chu Mu knew very well that the power of every sword under the realm was above that of the moon's slashing sword. He finally knew why the primordial world swordsmen he had seen so far did not use any sword skills. The reason was very simple. The use of sword skills often required time to accumulate power. Although this time was very short, it could be easily dodged by swordsmen with rich combat experience. They could take advantage of the situation and launch an attack, especially those swordsmen who had some achievements in power control. They applied power control to the sword, body movement, footwork, and so on. The power of each sword was not inferior to a sword skill. Since that was the case, why would they use sword skills that consumed more energy and were easier to dodge? Of course, Chu Mu felt that the primordial world swordsmen would not purely rely on close combat. They would definitely have sword skills. However, the sword skills of the primordial world's swordsmen should be different from the sword skills of the ancient sword continent's swordsmen. It was just that Chu Mu had not yet reached that level, so he was not clear about it. After finishing his cultivation, Chu Mu once again left the sword tower and went to the profound sky wall. He still had 2 more chances. He did not have extravagant hopes of raising tearing intent to perfection, but at least raising it to 99%. The second time's effect was not as good as the first time. Chu Mu's tearing intent went from 89% to 95%. Immediately after consolidating for a day, Chu Mu once again went to the mysterious heavenly wall. This caused the mysterious heavenly wall's attendants to be extremely shocked because other sword practitioners would need at least a few days to consolidate after comprehending once. Some even needed 10 days to half a month to completely consolidate before entering the mysterious heavenly wall again. Wasn't Chu Mu's speed a bit too fast? Seeing Chu Mu walk into the Xian heaven wall, this deacon couldn't help but shake his head. He really thinks he has some talent and overestimates himself. He's biting off more than he can chew. If he doesn't recognize himself, he won't be able to achieve much. Chu Mu didn't know what the deacon's evaluation was. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. After the third time, his tearing intent had reached 99%. His strength had risen explosively. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 646. Try to clench your fist tightly. Fill your entire arm with power and punch with all your might. Then try to relax your arm and fist. When your punch is about to hit the target you imagined, then burst out with power. Carefully feel the difference between the two methods. Once you understand it, you will naturally understand the essence of power control. Chu Mu said to the people in front of him. There were 3 of them. The first one was Su Haosha. The second one with slender eyebrows was Jiang Li, who came from the Aojian continent. The last one was an outrageously handsome man who looked less than 30 years old. In fact, he was close to 40 years old. His name was Ji Lingfeng, and he came from the Divine Sword continent. Previously, Chu Mu was practicing swordsmanship on the first floor of the Sword Tower. He had integrated the power of the domain of swordsmanship and the control of power at the boundary realm. He had used Sword Origin and Sword Intent and Profound, or Sword Origin and Sword Intent and Mountain Quake Energy to carefully feel the rhythm. Su Haosha and the other 2 came to Chu Mu to ask for guidance on power control. What was interesting was that all 3 of them were recipients of unparalleled glory. Su Haosha received the glory of unparalleled battle prowess, Jiang Li received the glory of unparalleled perception and battle prowess, and Ji Lingfeng received the glory of unparalleled swordsmanship and battle prowess. At the beginning, Jiang Li and Ji Lingfeng weren't convinced of Chu Mu's strength. After exchanging blows with Chu Mu, they lost under Chu Mu's sword in a single strike. They were convinced and sincerely asked for advice on how to train their strength control faster and better. Chu Mu did not hide anything and used simple examples to explain the so-called power control to the 3 of them. The 3 of them were among the top swordsmen of the 9 continents in every aspect. After hearing Chu Mu's simple explanation, they immediately gained something. However, their comprehension was not as good as Chu Mu's. They also did not have the foundation of swordsmanship and various theories like Chu Mu. They only had a preliminary understanding. Thank you for your guidance. If you have any errands for me in the future, I will not refuse. Jiang Li saluted with his sword and said solemnly. Su Haosha and Chu Mu had known each other for a long time and had quite a good relationship. He didn't say any polite words, but solemnly performed a sword salute to Chu Mu. As for the enviously handsome Ji Lingfeng, he had a smile on his face and also performed a sword salute to Chu Mu. He said, I will remember your kindness in guiding me. It's nothing. Chu Mu smiled faintly. We'll take our leave first. Chu Mu explained. Although Chu Mu's explanation was simple, they had gained something from it. This time, they were going to return to their respective sword towers to carefully comprehend it and step into the door of strength control. Chu Mu was not a saint, but if someone sincerely asked him for guidance, he would be willing to give them a few pointers. He also had a vague thought in his heart that he hoped the swordsmen of the 9 continents could become stronger and make the swordsmen of the immemorial world look at them in a different light. However, Chu Mu would not take the initiative to find the swordsmen of the 9 continents and give them pointers. That was not in line with Chu Mu's character, and they might not accept it. For example, if Su Haosha and the other 2 came to him in person with a very sincere attitude, Chu Mu would naturally not refuse or hide anything. The sword intent and the profound of tearing have reached 99%. At the very least, I still need to enter the sword cleansing pool and the Xiantian wall once before I can comprehend the sword intent and the profound of tearing to perfection. Thinking of this, Chu Mu could not help but touch the intermediate space ring on his left hand. There were 100 sky edge coins in it, which was the challenge fee given by Zhongtian. However, whether it was the sword cleansing pool or the Xiantian wall, one had to pay 200 sky edge coins each time. After calculating, Chu Mu still lacked 300 sky edge coins, which was the best result. If he could not reach perfection in the sword intent and the profound of tearing after entering the sword cleansing pool or the Xiantian wall again, he would have to enter again, which would require even more sky edge coins. I have to find a way to earn enough sky edge coins, Chu Mu thought to himself. He thought about the various ways to earn sky edge coins recorded in the Sword Palace overview. Doing missions was one of the most common method. Depending on the difficulty of the mission, the amount of sky edge coins one would receive after completing the mission would be different. The lowest reward would be a few sky edge coins, while the highest reward would be a few hundred sky edge coins. However, missions with high rewards were usually harder to complete, and might even require more time. The head instructor had only given Chu Mu half a year's time, and almost a month had passed. There were still a little more than 5 months left. Chu Mu was confident that he could reach perfection in both the sword intent and the profound of tearing within this period of time. However, he could reach his goal faster and reach a higher realm. Why not? Thinking about it again, Chu Mu's eyes lit up. He had found a way to earn enough sky edge coins in a short period of time. In the official disciple area of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, there was a very special training area called the Puppet Sword Array. As the name suggested, it was a sword array formed by sword puppet. According to the description in the Sword Palace overview, the first time one attempted the puppet sword array, there was a possibility of obtaining sky edge coins as a reward. However, there was a precondition for attempting the puppet sword array, which was to pay 100 sky edge coins as a fee. After passing the second stage, the 100 sky edge coins would be returned. After passing the third stage, the 100 sky edge coins would be returned. After passing the fourth stage, the reward would be 200 sky edge coins. If Chu Mu wanted to earn 300 sky edge coins, he only needed to pass the fourth stage. If he passed the fifth stage, the reward would be 400 sky edge coins, and so on. Every time he passed a stage, the sky edge coins he received would double the previous stage's reward. Once he made his decision, Chu Mu immediately took action. He quickly left the sword tower and headed for the puppet sword array area. The Sky Edge Sword Palace occupied an extremely large area with distinct areas. From the sword tower area to the puppet sword array area, it took Chu Mu an hour. This was under the condition that he was walking at a fast pace. If it was a normal person, they would need at least 14 to 14 hours or even longer to reach the puppet sword array area. Within the puppet sword array area, there were a total of 100 sword arrays. Around every sword array, there were many sword practitioners. There were at least 1,000 of them. They were observing the people attempting the puppet sword array, pointing and commenting. Chu Mu first headed to the administrative office of the puppet sword array area. After paying the 100 sky edge coins, he obtained the qualification to attempt the puppet sword array and a number plate. He then approached one of the puppet sword arrays. At this moment, there was a sword practitioner attempting the puppet sword array, and he was in an intense battle with the puppet sword array. The first stage of the puppet sword array had 2 sword puppets standing on the left and right. The sword practitioner attempting the puppet sword array had already passed the first stage and was in an intense battle with the sword puppets in the second stage. The second stage of the puppet sword array was formed by 3 sword puppets, forming a triangle. It was a type of tripartite sword array. Each of the 3 sword puppets could control their power. Although they had yet to reach the advanced realm, their overall strength was comparable to the upper echelon of the Sky Edge Sword Palace's official disciples. With 3 sword puppets of such strength working together to deal with the challenger, only a peak official disciple would be able to defeat them. Furthermore, the 3 sword puppets formed a sword array, which was even more powerful and difficult to deal with. A normal peak official disciple would have a hard time dealing with it, let alone 4 sword puppets forming the 3rd stage of the 4 symbols sword array. The strength of the swordsman who challenged the puppet sword array was obviously not at the level of a top official disciple. In the 2nd stage of the puppet sword array, under the continuous attacks of the 3 sword puppets, it was very difficult for him to resist. His defeat was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. The 3 sword puppets' coordination was very good. Every sword attack would not only attack the challenger, but also form a coordination with the other 2 sword puppets' attacks, sealing off the opponent's dodging. "He's about to lose," Chu Mu said inwardly. As expected, that swordsman was struck by one of the sword puppets and instantly flew out of the sword array. He landed on the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood, his face ashen. To the swordsmen of the immemorial world, getting injured was a common occurrence. This kind of injury could be healed in a short period of time by just taking a medicinal pellet. Soon, the next swordsman entered the 1st stage of the puppet sword array. Chu Mu's number plate showed the number 88, and the number of challengers was 72. In other words, Chu Mu still had to wait for a while before it was his turn. Soon after, that swordsman passed the 1st stage and was defeated in the 2nd stage. One after another, the swordsman entered the puppet sword array and was defeated in the 2nd stage. The only difference was how long they lasted. In less than 30 minutes, all the swordsmen stopped in the 2nd stage of the puppet sword array. They couldn't get back the 100 Sky Edge coins they paid. "Finally, it's my turn," Chu Mu said inwardly as he took a step forward. Everyone only saw a figure flash in front of them, and Chu Mu had already appeared in the 1st stage of the puppet sword array. Among the official disciples, most of them had heard of Chu Mu's name, but most of them hadn't seen Chu Mu in person. Therefore, when they saw Chu Mu enter the puppet sword array and dozens of other swordsmen stopped in the 2nd stage, they all thought that Chu Mu would also be stopped in the 2nd stage like the other swordsmen. Another person who thinks the Sky Edge coins are too much. 100 Sky Edge coins was a huge sum for many official disciples, because every time they completed a mission, they would only get a few or even a dozen Sky Edge coins. 100 Sky Edge coins would require them to complete many missions before they could get it. Challenging the puppet sword array was an extravagant challenge for many of the official disciples. The moment Chu Mu entered the 1st stage of the puppet sword formation, he immediately felt 2 powerful and sharp auras lock onto him. Immediately after, the sword puppets on the left and right moved, unsheathing their swords. With a thrust and a slash, they attacked Chu Mu from 2 different directions. The 1st stage of the puppet sword array, Yin and Yang sword array. Up and down, left and right, front and back, front and back. The 2 sword puppets unsheathed their swords and immediately displayed the full power of the sword array. Chu Mu's body didn't move. His sword was unsheathed like an aurora. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 647. The sword was like a stream of light, extremely fast and silent. It was so fast that the spectating swordsman did not even have time to react. Using the initial level of control over his strength, sword essence, sword intent, and mountain-shaking energy instantly merged into the 8 desolate sky sword. The moment it touched the head of the sword puppet on the left, a terrifying power exploded. The spectators only saw an unbelievably fast and weak sword light flash before their eyes. Before they could recover their vision, they heard a shocking explosion. With a bang, the head of the sword puppet on the left exploded into pieces that shot in all directions. With a flash of light, the arm of the sword puppet on the right flew high into the air. Simple, direct, and violent. Chu Mu used such a method to quickly pass through the first trial. This caused the spectating swordsmen's eyes to suddenly light up and their hearts to involuntarily beat wildly. So fast! Such terrifying power! The spectating swordsmen all exclaimed. The strength that Chu Mu displayed was much stronger than the dozens of swordsmen who had attempted the sword formation. Maybe he can pass through the second trial and enter the third. After passing the first trial, Chu Mu quickly entered the second trial. The two swordsmen who had been injured in the first trial quickly recovered under a strange power, as if they had never been injured. As soon as he entered the second trial, Chu Mu immediately felt an enormous pressure, which was double that of the first trial. The second trial of the sword puppet formation, tripartite sword formation. The tripartite sword formation was divided into heaven, earth, and man. It could also be up, down, front, middle, back, and so on. It was even more exquisite than the first trial's yin-yang sword formation. The three sword puppets immediately launched an attack at Chu Mu. Their swords stabbed and waved. Their speed was fast and their auras were small. When they were an inch away from Chu Mu, they poured their power into them and exploded, causing their speed to explosively increase. The terrifying sword pressure caused the air in front of them to be pushed aside, creating a vacuum. Whether or not he could dodge was relative. The dozens of swordsmen before were unable to dodge the attacks of the three sword puppets because their overall strength was not enough. Even though Chu Mu did not see the sword puppets' attacks with his own eyes, his incomparably powerful mind allowed him to clearly know the trajectories of the three sword puppets' attacks, and thus he could accurately dodge them. Just by shifting his feet slightly, the three terrifying sword light brushed past him. It seemed that he was very lucky. The interest of the surrounding swordsmen was piqued. They all stared with wide eyes at Chu Mu, who was in the sword formation. This is a good opportunity. Quickly counterattack. Dodge, quickly dodge. Many swordsmen clenched their fists and roared. It was as if they had become Chu Mu. However, Chu Mu, who was inside the sword formation, could not hear their shouts, nor could he see their figures. This was because the sword formation seemed to be a separate place. Moreover, his mind was completely focused on the sword formation. In the eyes of the other swordsmen, there were some places where Chu Mu could immediately counterattack after dodging. However, Chu Mu, who was in the middle of them, felt differently. After dodging, there was indeed a chance to counterattack, but the timing was not suitable. This was because as soon as he counterattacked, he would immediately be hit. Even if he did not fly out of the sword formation, he would still be injured, which was not beneficial for the next stage. The difficulty of the second stage of the puppet sword formation was much higher than that of the first stage. Chu Mu had also done some research on sword formations, but it was only at the beginner level. Now that he was challenging the puppet sword formation, it was also a chance for him to have a deeper understanding of sword formations. Dodging and blocking, Chu Mu shuttled back and forth within the tripartite sword formation like a fish. Although the range was small, he was very flexible and agile, which gave people a visual pleasure. After about 10 breaths, Chu Mu roughly grasped the trajectory of the three sword puppets' swords and so on. The tripartite sword formation was more exquisite than the yin-yang sword formation, but there was still a limit. With Chu Mu's strong spiritual will and comprehension, as well as his personal experience, he quickly understood it. With a slight sway of his body, three sword lights swept past Chu Mu's body. Chu Mu drew his sword at lightning speed and slashed at the sword puppet in front of him. He poured his power into it and exploded. The power of the realm expert was once again displayed. Under the power of the mountain-shaking energy, the sword puppet's neck was cut off, and its head was shattered into pieces by the terrifying vibrating power. The two sword puppets attacked again. In the eyes of other swordsmen, the two swords were moving at the same speed and would fall on Chu Mu at the same time. However, in Chu Mu's perception, there was a difference between the two swords. Taking advantage of the situation, he turned around and slashed down. Under the power of the ripping profound, the second sword puppet's head was split open, and it lost the ability to attack. He lifted his foot and kicked the third sword puppet, causing it to sway and the sword to deviate from its target. Chu Mu's sword flicked upwards, cutting off the arm of the third sword puppet that was holding the sword. He then sheathed his sword. From the moment Chu Mu unsheathed his sword to the moment he sheathed it, everyone only saw a not-so-dazzling sword-light streak through the air. Left, right, down, down, and up, it formed a nearly perfect arc. The three sword puppets all lost their ability to move, and they stood lifelessly in place, motionless. After passing the second stage, Chu Mu proceeded to the third stage. In the third stage, there were 4 sword puppets standing in the 4 directions. Their swords were in their sheaths, waiting to be unsheathed. The third stage of the sword puppet formation was the sword formation of 4 symbols. As soon as Chu Mu entered the third stage, he appeared in the center of the sword formation. The eyes of the 4 sword puppets lit up, emitting a fiery red, aqua blue, light green, and wood green light respectively. Their right hands moved at the same time, unsheathing their swords and slashing out. The 4 sword puppets not only had sword yuan at the peak of the complete origin realm, they also had complete sword intent and complete profound power. They were fire profound, water profound, gold profound, and wood profound respectively. The azure dragon was wood, the white tiger was wind, the vermilion bird was fire, and the black tortoise was water. Different profound auras were emitted from the 4 sword puppets. When each sword was an inch away from Chu Mu, the sword yuan, sword intent, and profound power would all explode. The swiftness of the wind, the fierceness of the fire, the continuous flow of the water, and the tenacity of the wood. 4 swords, 4 different attacks. Under the control of power, each of them released their own terrifying power. With the coordination of the sword formation of 4 symbols, the power was even more obvious. Chu Mu, who was in the middle of it, instantly felt the danger, giving him a feeling that he had nowhere to run. The power of the sword formation of 4 symbols was far superior to the 3 talents sword formation, at least 2 times stronger. Don't underestimate the increase of 2 times. Although it didn't sound like much, the difference was huge. The sword formation of 4 symbols made Chu Mu feel the real pressure. 100 Tianfeng coins was not that easy to earn. Chu Mu released his spiritual sense and raised his perception to the extreme. Everything around him was clearly captured by Chu Mu. The trajectories of the swords of the 4 sword puppets appeared in Chu Mu's perception. It was faster than light and faster than lightning. Chu Mu's thoughts spun quickly. He immediately used the trajectories of the 4 swords to deduce where the 4 swords would land and the various possible changes. Xiao Chen drew his sword and drew a circle in front of him. At the same time, his left foot took a step to the left. Following that, his right foot took a small step to the right. Xiao Chen turned around and charged at Chu Mu's 4 swords. He knocked away one of them and dodged the other 3. When the 4 sword puppet swords missed, they quickly moved, changing their positions and attacking again. The intervals between their attacks were extremely short, making it impossible for Chu Mu to find an opportunity to counterattack. Outside the sword formation of 4 symbols, the number of spectators increased from the original 1,000 to over 2,000. All of them stared at Chu Mu, who was inside the sword formation of 4 symbols. They did not blink, afraid that they would miss out on any exciting moment. If he can clear the 3rd stage, his strength will definitely be in the top 10,000 among the official disciples. The top 10,000 might sound like a lot, but one should not forget that there were more than 2 million official disciples in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. These top 10,000 disciples were all famous existences in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. The same level of control over power could be different due to the different profoundness that was fused into it. Fused with the profoundness of metal, the sharpness was astonishing. Fused with the profoundness of wind, the speed was faster. Fused with the profoundness of fire, the explosive power was stronger. Fused with the profoundness of water, the attacks were endless. The four sword puppets under the four symbols sword formation had different movement methods, different profoundness, and different attacking methods. They combined together in a nearly perfect way. They coordinated well and strengthened each other. Every time they attacked, Chumu had to be completely focused in order to block and dodge and find an opportunity to counterattack. More and more spectators gathered outside, and soon there were over 3,000. "Isn't that person Chumu?" A swordsman who had just arrived looked and said with his eyes wide open. "Chumu! Could it be that swordsman who came from a small world and grasped the control of boundary realm power in just over a month?" "That's right, it's him. Ever since this Chumu came to our Sky Edge Sword Palace, he has been in the limelight. Now, he's going to be famous again. How on earth did he cultivate? How could he cultivate his control of power to Boundary Realm in just over a month? And now, he can even pass the third stage of the sword puppet formation." Ever since that swordsman called out Chumu's identity, a frenzy of discussion broke out among the swordsmen. As the center of the discussion, Chumu didn't know anything. His mind was completely focused on the four sword puppets around him, carefully sensing every change in the four symbols' sword formation and grasping for an opportunity to counterattack. Opportunities were fleeting. Even if Chumu discovered them, the four sword puppets would immediately change their positions and attack again, giving Chumu a good opportunity to counterattack. At this time, he couldn't be anxious. He had to maintain his heart and be extremely patient. All distracting thoughts were expelled, and his mind, energy, and spirit were highly coordinated, fusing into one. His mind was fully released, and in Chumu's mind, a simulation of the four symbols sword formation appeared. The movements and swords of the four sword puppets were all reflected in Chumu's mind, allowing Chumu to perceive them even more clearly. The mysteries of the four symbols sword formation slowly appeared in Chumu's mind. As he familiarized himself with it and comprehended it, the movements and attacks of the four sword puppets were no longer so unfathomable. A powerful soul and comprehension once again brought benefits to Chumu. Here, with a thought, Chumu was the first to react. As expected, the swords of the four sword puppets brushed past him at the angle that Chumu had thought of. The time to counterattack had come. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 648. The third stage of the sword puppet formation. Sword formation of four divisions. Chumu began to counterattack with his sword. The sword silently sliced out, following the trajectory of the four sword puppets' attacks and movements. It very accurately sliced towards the arm of one of the sword puppets that held the sword. The moment the sword touched the arm of the sword puppet, the sword origin, sword intent, and ripping profound were poured into it and exploded. 99% sword intent and 99% ripping profound released an incomparably terrifying power. It was so sharp that it could cut through anything hard. Even though the body of the sword puppet was made of metal that was as hard as a royal-grade sword, it was still unable to block this peerlessly sharp sword. With a kenchi sound, the sword puppet's arm holding the sword was cut off by Chumu's sword. Taking a step forward with his left foot, a sharp sword light swept past his back, almost touching Chumu's back. With a twist of his wrist and a turn of his body, the sword slashed down diagonally, cutting off the arm of the second sword puppet. His body moved with his steps, and his sword moved with him. The sword was like a flying phoenix, advancing and retreating as it pleased. With his powerful mind and understanding of the sword formation of four divisions, Chumu was able to clearly capture the movements of the sword puppets. Everything appeared in his mind like a projection. Seizing the opportunity, Chumu cut into the formation. Like a shadow, he stuck close to the back of the third sword puppet. His sword rose and fell, sword light flickered, and the sword puppet's head was shattered by the terrifying power, splitting it into pieces. There was only one sword puppet left. The sword formation of 4 divisions required 4 sword puppets to form and display its strongest power. Now that 3 of them had been destroyed by Chu-Mu, there was only one left. The sword formation of 4 divisions no longer existed. With a light slash, a small part of the body of the 4th sword puppet was shattered by Chu-Mu's sword. The arm that held the sword was also sent flying. If it were a human swordsman, such an injury would cause them to lose 70% of their strength. They would not be able to threaten the opponent at all. The 3rd stage of the sword formation of 4 divisions passed. Chu-Mu passed the 3rd stage. Amazing, really amazing. He hasn't been in our Sky-Edge Sword Palace for long, yet he's already trained his strength to the initial stage. Now, he's even raised his strength to the level of official disciples in the top 10,000. This Chu-Mu's talent is truly terrifying. Looks like it won't be long before he becomes an elite disciple and leaves us far behind him. There were all kinds of discussions and sighs. At this time, the number of swordsmen watching. No matter which world they were in, humans were a group of people who loved crowds. Many swordsmen were curious when they saw that more and more people were gathering here, so they walked over. When they saw that someone had actually made it to the 4th stage of the sword puppet array, they immediately stopped to take a closer look. Sword formation of 4 divisions. The 5 elements sword formation had a total of 5 sword puppet. They stood in 5 different positions with their swords in their sheaths. Once Chu-Mu entered the sword formation of 5 elements, he quickly scanned the 5 sword puppets and saw them clearly. The sword formation of 5 elements consisted of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It corresponded to the puppet of metal, puppet of wood, puppet of water, puppet of fire, and puppet of earth. Every puppet's armor had a different color: light gold, wood green, water blue, fire red, and earth yellow. The color of their scabbards also corresponded to their attribute. When the 5 elements sword formation was activated, the dim eyes of the 5 sword puppets suddenly lit up. They respectively emitted light gold, wood green, water blue, fire red, and earth yellow. They shot out like the edge of a sword, piercing through space. Following that, a light sound rang out. The 5 sword puppets moved. A terrifying pressure instantly descended and crushed Chu-Mu's body. The 5 sword puppets attacked one after another. One after another, they stabbed towards Chu-Mu. 5 thin sword light of different colors pierced through the air. Chu-Mu's ears trembled slightly. A sharp sound pierced through the air and entered his ears. The trajectory of the 5 sword light naturally appeared in his mind. However, the swords were too fast. So fast that Chu-Mu could not react in time. Moreover, the sword formation of 5 elements gave him more than twice the pressure of the sword formation of 4 divisions. The huge pressure crushed his body, making Chu-Mu feel as if his 4 limbs were bound. Even though his consciousness was fast enough, his body was bound and he could not quickly react. He dodged the 5 sword attacks of the sword puppets with great difficulty. In the eyes of the swordsman outside, he was in a difficult situation. It seems that this Chu-Mu can only stop here. A swordsman shook his head and said, "To be able to make it to the 4th level, his luck can be considered heaven-defying. A mere swordsman from a small world, so what if he has some talent?" This voice was as sour as it could be. Its heart was filled with jealousy towards Chu-Mu. Chu-Mu's learning ability and adaptability were extremely strong. This was like his comprehension ability. No one could compare to him. After the first difficult dodge, Chu-Mu found the difference between his body's reaction and his mind's reaction and quickly made the corresponding adjustment. The pressure was too great. As long as he was within the sword formation of 5 elements, he could not eliminate it. Since that was the case, he had to react in advance. His powerful spiritual consciousness was distributed all around. After being tempered by the tempering mind technique and the teacher-in-chief's wine, The strength of his spiritual consciousness was 4 times stronger than before. It was so fine that the dust in the air could be clearly seen and distinguished. Releasing his spiritual consciousness in such an unbridled manner naturally caused Chu Mu's spiritual consciousness to consume a lot. However, his goal was to pass the 4th level of the sword formation of 5 elements and obtain sky edge coins. What he consumed could be replenished later. Using the flying swan illusory steps, Chu Mu wandered within the 5 elemental sword formation. As his footsteps changed, his body quickly changed as well. Often, in a short breath of time, Chu Mu's footsteps would change dozens of times. His body would also change dozens of times, causing the 5 elemental sword puppets' swords to all miss. As Chu Mu's research on the flying goose illusory steps improved, the flying goose illusory steps gradually evolved into a footwork that was suitable for jumping and moving within a small area. It could be used to dodge and counterattack. Previously, although the pressure was great, it was not enough for Chu Mu to use the flying goose illusory step. Now, the pressure of the sword formation of 5 elements was too great. Chu Mu had no choice but to use the flying goose illusory steps to dodge. Once the flying goose illusory steps was used, Chu Mu's previously disheveled appearance changed and became calm again. This caused the swordsman watching outside to be shocked. What a magical footwork! This Chu Mu is really terrifying. He surprises everyone time and time again. At this time, there were already more than 10,000 swordsmen watching. More and more people were attracted over. Then they were shocked. After learning about Chu Mu's identity, they were once again amazed. Among the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, there were only about 10,000 people who were able to pass the 3rd stage and enter the 4th stage. As for those who were able to pass the 4th stage and enter the 5th stage, there were only about 1,000 people. In other words, if Chu Mu could pass the 4th stage of the sword formation of 5 elements, his strength would be enough to enter the top 1,000 official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. If he could pass the 5th stage of the sword formation of 5 elements, then Chu Mu would have the strength to enter the top 100 official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Impossible, that's impossible. To be able to pass the 4th stage is already heaven-defying. I think he won't be able to pass the 4th stage. There were those who envied him, those who admired him, and of course there were also those who were jealous. It was a classic case of sour grape. Chu Mu's sword was still in its scabbard. It was fine if his sword was not unsheathed, but once it was unsheathed, it must make an effective attack. Dodging, 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 the 5 elements sword puppet's sword missed time and time again. The sharp and terrifying sword light almost brushed past Chu Mu's body. The 5 elements sword puppet had 5 swords and 5 sword light of different colors. They shuttled back and forth within the sword formation, while Chu Mu was fluttering like a butterfly. While dodging, Chu Mu's mental consciousness covered the surroundings and carefully observed every movement of the 5 elements sword puppet. Every movement of the 5 elements sword puppet was for the sword formation of 5 elements. Seeing through every movement of the 5 elements sword puppet was equivalent to understanding the sword formation of 5 elements bit by bit. Chu Mu's mental world reflected every movement of the sword formation of 5 elements sword formation. Chu Mu began to understand the mysteries of the sword formation of 5 elements sword formation bit by bit. Breaking through the sword puppet formation was not only a way to earn Sky Edge coins, but also a way to understand the sword formation of 5 elements sword formation. Every sword formation of the sword puppet formation was a relatively basic sword formation. For example, those powerful sword formations were also evolved from the basic sword formations. If one wanted to walk a path in sword formations, the mastery of the basic sword formations was indispensable. One must even study it in depth to reach an extremely profound level. As time passed, the number of onlookers exceeded 20,000. Chu Mu also had a preliminary understanding of the mysteries of the sword formation of 5 elements sword formation. He knew that it was time to counterattack. With the combination of the flying swan illusory steps and power control, Chu Mu's figure became even more fleeting. He was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. The 5 elements sword puppets' swords could not lock onto Chu Mu's figure at all. The counterattack began. The 8 desolate sky swords were unsheathed and extremely sharp. One sword cut into the 5 elements sword puppet's weak point. In the simplest and most direct way, it caused the sword formation of the 5 elements sword puppet to appear momentarily sluggish. With the 5 elements sword formation having a problem, the huge pressure instantly disappeared. As if he had regained his freedom, Chu Mu's speed increased rapidly. The sword light split into 5 and pierced towards the 5 elements sword puppet. When the tip of the sword came into contact, the power control was unleashed and exploded, instantly piercing through the 5 elements sword puppet's hard forehead. The 4th stage of the sword puppet formation, 5 elements sword formation, passed. Taking a step forward, Chu Mu left the 5 elements sword formation and entered the 5th stage of the sword puppet formation. The 5th stage of the sword puppet formation, hexagonal sword formation. Seeing Chu Mu pass the 4th stage and enter the 5th stage, the over 30,000 onlookers were all shocked. They felt that this swordsman from the small world was about to defy the heavens. Crazy, could it be that his strength has increased to the point where he can rival the top 100 in such a short period of time? If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 649. The tens of thousands of swordsmen remembered that not long ago, Bai Zhongtian, who was ranked 99th in the top 100, had issued a challenge card to Chu Mu. At that time, Chu Mu and Bai Zhongtian had indeed fought fiercely. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Bai Zhongtian had not used much of his strength at all, because his goal was to personally experience the control of power at the entry level so that he could comprehend and cultivate. If he had used his true strength, he could have easily defeated Chu Mu, so how could he have experienced it? It had only been a month since then. A month's time, to a talented swordsman, would indeed allow their strength to visibly increase. However, this Chu Mu's increase was truly too ridiculous. In just a month's time, he had gone from being able to fight with Bai Zhongtian, who had only been able to fight with 30% of his strength, to being able to compete with the top 100 swordsmen. This improvement was too great and unbelievable. If Chu Mu could pass the 5th checkpoint, it would mean that he truly had the strength of an official disciple in the top 100. This was because, up until now, only the top 100 swordsmen were able to pass the 5th checkpoint of the puppet sword formation. Hexagonal sword formation. 6 directions: up, down, front, back, left, right, heaven, earth, and the universe. Chu Mu was in the center of the hexagonal sword formation, and the 6 sword puppets were standing in a somewhat strange position. 4 of them were standing like the 4 symbol sword formations sword puppets. The other 2 sword puppets were standing rather casually. They looked like they were standing casually, but they gave Chu Mu a feeling that there was something mysterious about their standing positions. When the hexagonal sword formation was activated, a terrifying pressure instantly descended. This pressure was different from the pressure that came from all directions before. Not only was there pressure from all directions, but there was also pressure from up and down. 6 directions, up, down, front, back, left, and right, released a huge pressure from all directions, crushing Chu Mu's body. The source of the pressure was the 6 sword puppet. Although every sword puppet in the puppet sword formation was made of the same material, some different things were integrated into them, causing them to have different characteristics. This way, they could cooperate with each other to complete the sword formation and fully display its power. After all, puppets were puppets and not humans. For example, human swordsmen had intelligence and could adjust themselves, but puppets could not. They had to be set from the beginning and were difficult to change. Of course, it was rumored that there were also puppets that possessed intelligence. The pressure of the hexagonal sword formation was more than twice that of the 5 elements sword formation. It almost made Chu Mu feel as if his body could not move. He poured all his power into his body, resisting the pressure from the outside world. He performed the flying swan illusory steps and raised his mental power to the extreme. At this moment, Chu Mu forgot about the sky edge coins and everything else. There was only one thought in his mind, which was to see through the mystery of the hexagonal sword formation and break it. From the moment he entered the sword puppet array, this was the first time Chu Mu's concentration was at its highest level. His essence, energy, and spirit were in perfect harmony. In his spiritual world, the reflection of the hexagonal sword formation began to appear. The 6 sword puppets of the hexagonal sword formation attacked. 4 of them attacked from the front, back, left, and right, while the other 2 attacked from above and below. The hexagonal sword formation was even more profound than the 5 elements sword formation. The pressure was too great, making Chu Mu feel powerless. He knew very well that with his current strength, it would be difficult for him to last long in the hexagonal sword formation. If he did not break through the hexagonal sword formation as soon as possible, he was afraid that, under the immense pressure, he would continue to exhaust himself and lose to the hexagonal sword formation. It seems that I can only create the hexagonal sword formation when I'm stronger and see through its mystery. Now I'll break the formation. With that thought, Chu Mu decided to counterattack with his sword. He mobilized all his power and performed the sword technique domain. The power of the sword technique domain immediately affected an area of 3 meters. Although the power of the sword technique domain was greatly weakened under the pressure of the hexagonal sword formation, it was still able to affect the swords of the hexagonal sword puppets, causing the swords' trajectories to deviate. In a battle between experts, the slightest difference could lead to a huge loss. A slight deviation was enough for Chu Mu. He controlled his strength at the advanced realm and unleashed the mountain quake force at full force. With a boom, a sword puppet's arm was chopped off and sent flying. With the flying swan illusory steps, Chu Mu quickly dodged the attacks of the other sword puppets, but his long robe was cut open. A violent sword with a violent mountain quake force, a sharp sword with a sharp laceration profound. Without a sword puppet, the power of the hexagonal sword formation decreased, and the pressure was greatly reduced. It was reduced to the level of the 5 elements sword formation, allowing Chu Mu to move even faster. Kill, 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 kill. The remaining 5 sword puppets were defeated by Chu Mu one after another, and Chu Mu's long robe had a few more cuts. Fortunately, his body was not injured. He was gasping for breath. He had used up too much energy. Luckily, my control of strength has reached the advanced realm, allowing me to save a lot of energy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to pass through the hexagonal sword formation, Chu Mu thought to himself. He was sure that even if it was an ultimate realm sword artist, whose sword intent profound and sword energy were above his own, it would be impossible for him to pass through the hexagonal sword formation without cultivating his control of strength to the advanced realm. Resisting the pressure of the sword formation required energy. Dodging required energy. Counterattacking also required energy. Everything required energy. Chu Mu left the hexagonal sword formation because he knew that with his current state, the pressure would be enough to immobilize him once he entered the 6th stage. Around the sword puppet formation, there were more than 100,000 sword artists watching. All of them were staring at Chu Mu with admiration. In the world of sword artists, the strong were respected. No matter what your background was, as long as you displayed outstanding talent and strength, you would be able to win the respect of others. Of course, that was under most circumstances. There would always be some exceptions, such as those who were unconvinced or jealous. Passing the second stage of the sword puppet formation would bring back 100 sky edge coins. Passing the third stage would bring back 100 sky edge coins. Passing the fourth stage would bring back 200 sky edge coins. Passing the fifth stage would bring back 400 sky edge coins. In the end, other than the 100 sky edge coins that he paid, Chu-Mu also received 700 sky edge coins. The main purpose of the sword puppet formation was for sword artists to train and not to earn sky edge coins. It was only a reward mechanism. If Chu-Mu wanted to challenge the sword puppet formation again, he would have to make a breakthrough if he wanted to receive the sky edge coins. In other words, if he passed the fifth stage the first time, he would only be able to receive the reward if he passed the sixth stage. Otherwise, if he only passed the fifth stage the second time, he would not be able to receive any reward. He would only be able to get back the 100 sky edge coins that he paid. This rule of the Sky Edge Sword Palace was equivalent to putting an end to the disciples who wanted to take shortcuts to earn Sky Edge coins. If one wanted to earn Sky Edge coins, they had to break through their own limits and pass higher stages. With 700 Sky Edge coins in hand, Chu-Mu had a total of 800 Sky Edge coins. It was enough for him to enter the sword cleansing pool or the mysterious sky wall 4 times. Chu-Mu first returned to the sword gauntlet and sat cross-legged in his bedroom. He split his attention between the sky desolate sword scripture and the mind tempering technique. Although the mind tempering technique was only a basic technique for tempering one's mind, and after mastering it, one would not be able to strengthen one's mind no matter how much one cultivated. However, it could accelerate the recovery of one's mind and was much faster than one's own recovery speed. Chu-Mu's mind and sky desolate sword essence were both rapidly recovering. His exhausted physical strength and other things were also rapidly recovering. While Chu-Mu was recovering in the sword gauntlet, the outside world was once again shaken because of him. Causing a commotion within the Sky Edge Sword Palace was relatively common. For example, it was Zhang San who did something shocking today. A few days later, it was Li Si who reached a level that ordinary people could not reach. However, in a short 1 or 2 months, it was the same person who caused a commotion one after another. This was shocking. Once again, Chu-Mu's name became famous and became the focus of attention. This kid is really surprising time and time again. After Ji Tianxiang learned of this, he immediately chuckled. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. He decided to tell this news to the teacher in charge. Maybe the teacher in charge will be very surprised. In Ji Tianxiang's mind, he could imagine the teacher in charge's surprised expression. Past the 5th stage of the sword puppet formation. After Bai Zhongtian learned of this news, his face was instantly filled with astonishment. He remembered very clearly that not long ago, he issued a challenge card to Chu-Mu and fought with him. At that time, he wanted to experience more control of his power. Therefore, he controlled his strength to about 30%, which brought great pressure to Chu-Mu and forced him to fight with his full strength. 30% of a swordsman's strength sounded like a lot. In fact, every 10% increase in a swordsman's strength was very obvious. Bai Zhongtian was very clear that if he used 40% of his strength, he would be able to defeat Chu-Mu in less than 3 moves. He did not expect that in just a month Chu-Mu's strength would increase by leaps and bounds. He could suddenly increase his strength to the point where he could pass the 5th stage of the sword puppet formation. That kind of strength was comparable to the disciples in the top 100. But you are improving, and so am I. Now I am definitely much stronger than before. Bai Zhongtian secretly laughed. At the same time, he was also feeling emotional. He was indeed a genius who could cultivate his control of power to the advanced realm in just over a month. He really looked forward to the opportunity to fight with his full strength. Chu-Mu, a swordsman from a small world, can actually reach this step. It is indeed very surprising. His talent is not bad. He is qualified to serve me. Go and recruit him." This time, Chu Mu's name really attracted the attention of the disciples in the top 100. In particular, the disciples in the top 10 also looked at Chu Mu seriously. At the same time, most of the swordsmen from the 9 continents were overjoyed. "Chu Mu, I will not lose to you." When Fan Bufan, who was practicing swordsmanship in the sword tower, heard this news, his expression changed. He gripped the sword in his hand tightly, and there was a look of reluctance on his handsome face. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 650. Fan Bufan came from the Heavenly Sword continent, which was ranked first in terms of overall strength among the 9 continents. He was 36 years old and enjoyed the glory of peerless swordsmanship, peerless comprehension, and peerless battle prowess. It could be said that in the Sky Sword continent, Fan Bufan was a true proud son of heaven. No one could compare to him. Other than the title of proud son of heaven, Fan Bufan was also called the Little Sword Saint by countless people. The title of Little Sword Saint did not mean that Fan Bufan had the strength of a sword saint or was comparable to a sword saint. In fact, he was still far from it. It was only because of his extraordinary talent that no one in the younger generation of the Sky Sword continent could compare to. He was believed to be in existence that could become a sword saint within 100 years. This point was affirmed by many sword saints in the Sky Sword continent. There was even an incident where dozens of sword saints wantonly fought to take him in as a disciple, which caused a great commotion in the Sky Sword continent. His name was Bufan. He was extraordinary, and so was his sword. He had countless halos and countless honors. No matter where he went, he would be the focus of attention. He was already used to it. When he obtained the 3 unparalleled honors, he was told to enter the primeval world, the birthplace of swordsmen, a huge ancient world with countless geniuses and experts. Fan Bufan was very much looking forward to it. He was very confident that whether it was in the Sky Sword continent or the primeval world, he would be the focus of attention and become a proud son of heaven. However, the reality was different from what he expected. The swordsmen of the primeval world, regardless of talent or cultivation environment, were obviously stronger than the swordsmen of the 9 continents. He, Fan Bufan, was the most outstanding person in the Sky Sword continent, the strongest among the sword saints. After coming to the Sky Edge Sword Palace, his strength was only equivalent to the upper echelon among the official disciples. Above him, there were at least 100,000 existences that were stronger than him. And this was only a corner of the primeval world. After suffering a blow, Fan Bufan did not give up on himself. Instead, he worked even harder to cultivate. He believed that since he could become the focus of attention in the Sky Sword continent and become the #1 sword saint, then in the primeval world, he could also do it if he was given some time. The primeval world was more suitable for cultivation. In a short 2 months, Fan Bufan felt that his strength had indeed increased by a lot. However, in terms of control of strength, he was not very satisfied. In fact, Fan Bufan's improvement in power control had already left many swordsmen in the dust. He was comparable to many swordsmen who had cultivated power control for 3 or 4 years. Chu Mu's sudden fame was a blow to Fan Bufan, and it was a blow that came again and again. In Fan Bufan's opinion, this was not allowed. Among the swordsmen from the 9 continents, he had to be the most outstanding one. All the glory had to be concentrated on him. However, all of this had been snatched away by Chu Mu. Inexplicably, Fan Bufan felt an enmity towards Chu Mu. He decided to use his own hard work and strength to defeat Chu Mu. He wanted to tell others that he, Fan Bufan, was the true genius of the heavens. Fan Bufan worked even harder in his cultivation. His talent was astonishing, and his control over his strength was improving every day. He wasn't far from the advanced realm. Chu Mu did not know that he had inexplicably gained an enemy, and a strong one at that. His mind, sky desolate sword essence, and physical strength had all recovered to their peak. Chu Mu immediately left the sword tower and strode towards the sword cleansing pool. He was already somewhat impatient. What would it be like when one's sword intent reached perfection? Within the sky-edged sword palace, more and more swordsmen recognized Chu Mu. Not only did they know Chu Mu's name, they also knew what he looked like. Therefore, when Chu Mu walked on the road, there were immediately people who recognized him and loudly shouted out his name. Some swordsmen who had heard of Chu Mu's name but had never seen Chu Mu's appearance also remembered Chu Mu's appearance. Soon, Chu Mu once again arrived at the sword cleansing pool. He paid 200 sky edge coins and entered the sword cleansing pool. After walking for a quarter of an hour, Chu Mu found an empty spot and immediately sat down cross-legged. He stared at the calm surface of the sword cleansing pool and quickly eliminated all distracting thoughts from his mind. He entered an ethereal state. Layers of ripples spread out from the calm water of the sword cleansing pool. Chu Mu's reflection once again appeared in the pool. It was as if the sword cleansing pool had given him life and naturally moved. He was still practicing the sword. He still started from the most basic sword techniques and gradually changed and deepened until he reached his current level. At this moment, Chu Mu's sword techniques had improved again. Time slowly passed. Chu Mu forgot everything and immersed himself in the sword cleansing pool. His essence, qi, and spirit seemed to have fused together. His reflection in the spiritual world seemed to have become one with his body. It was a very strange feeling. The 99% sword intent was the limit of Deshang's sword intent. It was only a fraction away from perfect sword intent. There was a membrane between the two. At this moment, Chu Mu's various comprehensions appeared and turned into an invisible sword that constantly pierced that membrane. As his comprehension deepened, the invisible sword became even sharper and more powerful. The tough membrane began to show signs of being pierced. In the sword cleansing pool, Chu Mu's reflection finished practicing the last round of the sword technique, which was the most profound sword technique that Chu Mu had mastered. The moment he withdrew the sword, the invisible sword's power increased several times. The sword stabbed out silently at first, but the moment it pierced the membrane, the power burst out and reached the tip of the sword. Chu Mu seemed to hear a pop as if a bubble had burst. In the next moment, he immediately felt a kind of vast sea and sky. A kind of extreme sharpness emerged. Vaguely, he seemed to see an ancient sword appear in the vast darkness, releasing a threatening sharpness. The sword intent had broken through 99% and reached 100%. The sword intent had finally reached perfection. Chu Mu had an impulse to look up to the sky and roar. The perfection of the sword intent was not only twice as much as that of the 99% sword intent, but also had an obvious improvement in strength. The difference was very obvious. The embryonic form of the sword soul in the spiritual world became clearer and more solid. It felt like a real sword, full of texture. Chu Mu also found that in addition to the perfection of the sword intent, his sword technique domain had also reached the peak of the third level, only a fine line away from the fourth level. What's left is the tearing profound. Chu Mu took a deep breath to calm his excited heart. He got up and quickly left the sword cleansing pool. The next stop was the mysterious sky wall. After paying 200 sky edge coins, Chu Mu entered the mysterious sky wall area and found an empty place to sit down. He stared at the mysterious sky wall and began to comprehend. The cultivation Holy Land itself had a strange power that could help people get rid of the distracting thoughts in their mind faster, enter the ethereal state faster, and comprehend all kinds of mysteries better. Chu Mu's consciousness condensed into a body and appeared in the mysterious sky wall. Around him, there were many profound nebulas floating. The tearing profound was composed of the gold profound and the wind profound. Chu Mu's consciousness directly entered the gold profound nebula and began to comprehend. All kinds of mysteries about the gold profound appeared in Chu Mu's mind. Some that he had already comprehended, some that he had never comprehended, gradually appeared and deepened Chu Mu's comprehension. Abandoning all kinds of beautiful descriptions, gold was only the sharpness, and the sharpness was unstoppable. After grasping the ultimate mystery of the gold profound, Chu Mu was shocked. The gold profound had reached the perfection level. His consciousness withdrew from the gold profound nebula. Since the gold profound had reached the perfection level, there was no need to continue to comprehend it. He changed to another profound. His consciousness instantly entered the wind profound nebula. The tearing profound was a complete mutation of the gold profound, and the wind profound only occupied half of it. Therefore, Chu Mu needed to discard the unnecessary part of the wind profound and keep the part that was useful for the tearing profound. Compared to the gold profound, it was more complicated. Time flew. The lightness of the wind, the elegance of the wind, the swiftness of the wind, and the other mysteries of the wind profound all appeared in his mind. Finally, the parts of the wind profound that were useful for the tearing profound were all comprehended by Chu Mu. Chu Mu's consciousness withdrew from the wind profound nebula and started to merge the wind profound that he had comprehended with the gold profound that he had comprehended to perfection. Comprehend, comprehend, comprehend. The gold profound and the wind profound had merged perfectly. The tearing profound had broken through the tough membrane from 99% to 100%. The tearing profound had reached the perfection level. The perfection level of the tearing profound was 2 times more powerful than the 99% tearing profound. Its strength had also increased. Its overall power had increased by more than 2 times. With the perfection level of the sword essence and the perfection level of the tearing profound, Chu Mu's strength had improved by leaps and bounds again. If I challenge the puppet sword formation now, I should be able to pass the hexagonal sword formation in the 5th level easily. I might even be able to challenge the 7 stars sword formation in the 6th level. Chu Mu said to himself after taking a deep breath. When Chu Mu had passed the hexagonal sword formation, it had been a bit difficult for him. His long robe had even been cut by the hexagonal sword puppets. Fortunately, he had dodged in time and had not been injured. If it were now, Chu Mu was confident that he could pass the hexagonal sword formation without any injuries. As for the 7 stars sword formation, he was not so sure because the pressure brought by the 7 stars sword formation was at least twice as much as that of the hexagonal sword formation. In addition to other aspects, the power of the 7 stars sword formation was definitely much greater than that of the hexagonal sword formation. Standing up, Chu Mu raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky of the ancient immemorial realm was vast and boundless. His sword essence and tearing profound had reached perfection. This meant that Chu Mu's strength had reached a limit. Even if his other profound had reached perfection, it would not be able to increase his absolute strength. Only the profound of space would be able to increase his strength by leaps and bounds. Of course, if his other profound had reached perfection, it would mean that Chu Mu would have more tricks up his sleeve. When fighting, there would be more variations. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 651. Next, I need to earn more Sky Edge coins and comprehend the illusionary profound, water and fire profound to completion. Chu Mu said to himself as he walked out of the mysterious sky wall. As for the space profound, it wasn't that he didn't want to comprehend it to completion. However, the space profound was very profound and difficult to comprehend. There was no space profound nebula in the mysterious sky wall, so he couldn't comprehend it faster. It was very difficult to comprehend the space profound to completion. Once he comprehended the profound to completion, he would then break through from the origin realm to the God condensation realm. However, before that, Chu Mu had to raise his cultivation talent to 5th rank first. Only then would he be able to raise the upper limit of his cultivation to the God-congealing realm. After cultivating heaven-seizing technique for a long time, Chu Mu felt that his talent wasn't far from fifth rank. After returning to the Sword Tower and entering the second floor's hall, Chu Mu realized that there was another stranger in the hall besides Jiang Chuan. Seeing Chu Mu, Jiang Chuan immediately stood up and let out a breath of relief. His slightly ugly face showed an expression of relief, as if he had found his backbone. As for the stranger, he was calmly sitting on the chair. He glanced at Jiang Chuan from the corner of his eyes with a trace of disdain and contempt. Then, he looked at Chu Mu and coldly said, "So you're Chu Mu. You're really arrogant, making me wait for you for so long." Chu Mu was stunned. He didn't seem to remember inviting this person. "Do I know you?" Chu Mu asked indifferently. "You will know me soon." The stranger was startled. He didn't expect Chu Mu to say that. He immediately reacted and said with a cold expression, "My surname is Chu, and my name is Chu Tinkong. Speaking of which, we have the same surname. From now on, you might be qualified to be my companion." "I don't know what you are talking about. If there is nothing else, you can leave." Chu Mu was confused. However, the stranger's attitude and tone made him unhappy, so he directly asked him to leave. "I am Lord Sikongjian's follower. Lord Sikongjian heard that your talent is good and you have a certain level of strength. He feels that you are qualified to be his follower. On Lord Sikongjian's orders, I've come to invite you to join Lord Sikongjian's subordinates, follow Lord Sikongjian, and serve Lord Sikongjian together." Chu Tinkong's figure did not move at all. He still said coldly, however, "It's not that easy to become Lord Sikongjian's follower. You still need to pass the assessment and get our approval before you can become Lord Sikongjian's follower." Chu Mu was instantly stunned and shocked. "If you're done, you can leave. This place doesn't welcome you," Chu Mu said indifferently, once again sending him off. "Chu Mu!" Chu Tinkong stood up. His cold face flashed with anger. His voice was like thunder as he glared at Chu Mu. His eyes were filled with anger as if he wanted to burn Chu Mu to ashes. The terrifying aura was incomparably sharp, fluctuating around Chu Tinkong's body like a surging tide. Jiang Chuan's expression kept changing as he felt his heart tremble. Because the aura emitted by Chu Tinkong was very strong, making him feel oppressed. This showed that Chu Tinkong's strength was far superior to Jiang Chuan. "If you think that it is an honor to be Sikongjian's follower, that is your business. It has nothing to do with me." Chu Mu ignored Chu Tinkong's anger and aura and said indifferently, "But I am Chu Mu." A simple sentence, but it displayed Chu Mu's pride and confidence without a doubt. "Chu Mu, since we have the same surname, I'll remind you. You have to know that Senior Sikongjian is the #1 official disciple of our Heavenly Edge Sword Palace. His talent and strength are unmatched among official disciples. Even some elite disciples aren't Senior Sikongjian's opponent." Chu Tinkong suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice. His voice was like the roar of a ferocious beast. Once, the 3 elite disciple battle teams invited Lord Sikongjian to join them, but they were all rejected by Lord Sikongjian because Lord Sikongjian has his own big goal. After he becomes an elite disciple, he will establish his own battle team. With Lord Sikongjian's talent and strength, he will definitely develop the battle team. In the future, it will be comparable to the 3 elite battle teams, or even surpass them. If you become Lord Sikongjian's follower, you will be able to join the battle team with unlimited potential in the future. How glorious that will be! You don't deserve to have the same surname as me. Chu Mu was unmoved and said indifferently. "You." Chu Tinkong was like a cat that had its tail stepped on. His hair and beard were fluttering in anger. The fierce aura emitted from his body instantly skyrocketed. He held the sword hilt and pulled it out by 3 inches. A terrifying sharp aura suddenly poured out and turned into an invisible sword that slashed towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu let Chu Tinkong's sharp aura attack him. He didn't move an inch and his expression didn't even change. Want to fight? Chu Mu said with a smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. Chu Tinkong's expression kept changing. He widened his eyes and stared at Chu Mu. He clenched his teeth and the veins on his forehead bulged. After a while, Chu Tinkong released the sword hilt and restrained his anger. Chu Mu, this is your own choice. Don't regret it in the future. Chu Tinkong stared at Chu Mu. His voice seemed to come out from the depths of his throat. Get out, Chu Mu said without any trace of politeness. These two words were extremely cold and indifferent, causing people's hearts to palpitate. Chu Tinkong didn't say anything else. He felt that if he continued to stay here, he wouldn't be able to endure and would draw his sword. When that time comes, no matter what the result was, if a conflict broke out in the sword tower, he would inevitably be punished and implicate Sikong Zhan. Coldly glancing at Chu Mu, Chu Tinkong walked past Chu Mu and strode down the stairs. Chu Mu, this is equivalent to offending Sikong Zhan, Jiang Chuan said worriedly. Sikong Zhan was publicly acknowledged as the #1 official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Naturally, he was also the #1 in the top 100. No one doubted this point because those who were unconvinced had all lost under Sikong Zhan's sword. Moreover, they were defeated by Sikong Zhan with absolute strength. There were over 2 million official disciples in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. For Sikong Zhan to be able to occupy the #1 position for 4 to 5 years, it was enough to show how terrifying his strength was. In theory, the official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace only had 10 years. If they couldn't become an elite disciple within 10 years, they would have to leave the Sky Edge Sword Palace because the purpose of the Sky Edge Sword Palace was to nurture talents. If they couldn't become an elite disciple within 10 years using the various resources of the Sky Edge Sword Palace to cultivate, then they were no different from trash. Continuing to stay in the Sky Edge Sword Palace would only be a waste of resources. However, there was an exception, and that was if they could become the top 100 official disciples, then they wouldn't be restricted by 10 years. In Jiang Chuan's opinion, although Chu Mu's talent was shocking, he still needed time. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to compare with an expert like Sikong Zhan. Now that he had offended Sikong Zhan, if Sikong Zhan came to find trouble with him, then Chu Mu might be in a very passive position. Jiang Chuan, can you help me find out more information about Sikong Zhan? Chu Mu said indifferently. He knew about Jiang Chuan's worries, but Chu Mu's temperament was just like that. If people respected him, then he would respect them. If people didn't respect him, then why should he respect them? If Sikong Zhan wanted to find trouble with him because of this matter, then it could only be said that Sikong Zhan was narrow-minded and didn't deserve to be the #1 official disciple. No problem, leave it to me. I will definitely find out more about him. Jiang Chuan patted his chest and said. He was now very respectful towards Chu Mu, and seemed to regard Chu Mu as his backbone. Jiang Chuan immediately took action and left the sword tower to find out more information about Sikong Zhan. On the other hand, Chu Mu went back to his bedroom to meditate and comprehend the sword intent and profound, consolidating them. Sikong Zhan's information was very easy to find out, and it didn't take long for Jiang Chuan to return. Chu Mu, I have already found out more about him, Jiang Chuan hurriedly said. Rumor has it that Sikong Zhan has already cultivated his control over his strength to the advanced stage. Moreover, he has passed the 7th stage of the sword puppet formation. However, he rarely makes a move himself in the past 2 years. Therefore, no one knows exactly how strong he is. I also found out that 1 year ago, Qin Shanhe, who was ranked 2nd, challenged Sikong Zhan, but was defeated by Sikong Zhan in 3-sword strike. Jiang Chuan continued. Chu Mu nodded. The difference in strength between the 2nd and 1st place was indeed unexpected. However, although Sikong Zhan's information was very easy to find out, some of the true secrets could not be found out. Therefore, Chu Mu did not know much about Xikongzhan and only knew the surface level. The information that Jiang Chuan found out was mostly about Xikongzhan's followers. There are many swordsmen who want to follow Xikongzhan, but Xikongzhan has very high requirements for his followers. They must pass his test and gain the recognition of the other followers. Jiang Chuan said, "Currently, Xikongzhan has a total of 13 followers, and they are called the 13 Generals. Every one of them is very powerful, and they have all passed the 4th stage of the puppet sword array. However, they all left the puppet sword array after passing the 4th stage, and did not attempt the 5th stage. Some people speculate that they know they are not strong enough, while others speculate that they might be deliberately hiding their strength." Chu Tenkong is ranked 9th among Xikongzhan's 13 generals, Jiang Chuan added, and told Chu Mu the names of the other generals, so that Chu Mu could have a better understanding of them. It is said that the 13 generals often receive guidance from Xikongzhan. Their strength is not as simple as it seems on the surface, Jiang Chuan said in the end. Chu Mu nodded and smiled at Jiang Chuan. "Jiang Chuan, thank you for your hard work." "It's nothing." Jiang Chuan laughed out loud. Soon after, he seemed to intentionally or unintentionally say, "If Chu Mu also plans on recruiting followers, I reckon there will be many people willing to become your followers." "Followers?" He glanced at Jiang Chuan. "I don't have such thoughts at the moment. Let's talk about it later." When Jiang Chuan heard this, a hint of disappointment flashed through his eyes. He said this to test if Chu Mu had any intention of recruiting followers. If he did, he would immediately ask to become Chu Mu's follower. After coming to the immemorial world, Jiang Chuan deeply understood that with his talent, it would not be easy to gain a foothold in the immemorial world. If he could find a good backer, it would be very beneficial for him. Unfortunately, Chu Mu indicated that he did not have any intention of recruiting followers at the moment. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation.